His eyes hardened. Control, perception, guidance. Call it what you will. I am its keeper. And if you truly wish to stop it, you must break the spiral at its center. The first real battle. Suddenly, the house seemed to shift. Shadows elongated unnaturally, walls creaking as if alive. Evelyn moved with a speed that belied her age, slashing at Claire with a hidden blade she had concealed. Mercer intercepted her, grappling and forcing her backward. Emily, guided by the spirals, pointed to a pattern on the floor. The nodes. Step on the lines. Follow the spiral. Claire and Mercer moved carefully, stepping along the spirals while keeping Evelyn at bay. Each step seemed to resonate through the floorboards, activating mechanisms hidden beneath the house. Panels slid open, revealing tunnels, traps, and hidden rooms filled with evidence of decades of orchestrated disappearances. Evelyn snarled, realizing the threat. You think you can unravel the spiral without consequence? Foolish children. Emily's small voice rang out. I'm not a child. I see it now. The spiral ends here. With one final, coordinated push, Claire and Mercer forced Evelyn into a hidden room lined with mirrors, symbols, and spiral diagrams. The architect was cornered, the nodes and patterns disrupted by Emily's insight. The revelation of the true mastermind. As the dust settled, Claire examined the room. Every spiral, every symbol, every annotation traced back to Evelyn, but also revealed another layer. There were symbols predating her, notes in handwriting that predated the 1930s, instructions that hinted at someone older, someone still alive. Evelyn isn't the origin, Claire whispered. She's a caretaker. Someone started this spiral long before her. And if we're not careful, the real mastermind is still out there. Mercer looked at Emily. Then our work isn't done. The architect may be revealed, but the spiral, it's bigger than anyone imagined. Emily nodded, determination in her eyes. Then we keep following it to the center. Evelyn, restrained but calm, smirked faintly. Very well. Follow the spiral, and you will see the truth. But be warned, truth comes at a cost. Claire and Mercer exchanged a grim glance. They had uncovered the architect, but the deeper mystery of Hollow Creek, the spiral's origin, and the deadly network it commanded were far from over. The town's secrets were still alive, and the spiral was far from finished. Hollow Creek had grown colder, the fog thicker than ever. It clung to the town like a living entity, crawling along streets, curling around streetlights, and swallowing the edges of buildings. Even the sun, weak and pale behind the clouds, seemed unwilling to pierce the heavy mist. For Claire Whitman, Officer Daniel Mercer, and Emily, the town had become both battlefield and puzzle. The spiral had revealed its nodes, its traps, and now its ultimate plan. The tower, the hidden houses, the abandoned community center. They were all part of a mechanism that had been decades in the making. And tonight, the final mechanism would activate. The warning. Emily's notebook trembled in her hands. I can feel it, she whispered. The final mechanism, it's about to start. The spiral, it moves faster now. Claire studied the diagrams, lines of spirals converging on a single point in the outskirts of Hollow Creek. Everything leads here, she said. Every disappearance, every trap, every manipulated node, it's all building towards something. Mercer's voice was tense. Then we don't have much time. Whatever it is, we need to get there before it's too late. Emily shook her head. Not just us. We need the children. The townspeople, everyone. If the mechanism activates, the spiral will take them too. Claire swallowed hard. Then we warn them. Everyone out of Hollow Creek, or at least off the nodes. The approach. The trio moved cautiously through the mist toward the final location. Emily's notebook glowed faintly under the flashlight beams, lines and symbols marking invisible paths through the forest, across the river, and toward a clearing surrounded by centuries-old oak trees. It's here, Emily said. This is the center. The spiral ends, or begins again. The clearing was ominously quiet. The air was thick, almost tangible, as if charged with energy. Mercer held his gun ready, flashlight scanning for movement. Claire knelt and examined the ground. Symbols had been etched into the dirt, spirals forming concentric circles that radiated outward. The final mechanism isn't a machine in the traditional sense, she said. It's this: patterns, rituals, nodes, and people all woven together. When it activates, it orchestrates everything simultaneously. Emily shivered. It's like a web but alive. It's waiting for someone to step in the center. The first trigger. Suddenly, a shadow moved at the edge of the clearing, a cloaked figure, moving with unnatural speed. Mercer raised his weapon. "Stop right there." The figure paused, then slowly raised its head. It was Evelyn Marsh, the architect they had captured earlier, now freed by unknown accomplices who had been tracking Claire and Mercer. "You should have stayed away," Evelyn said calmly, her eyes cold. "The mechanism is already active. You've disrupted some of the nodes, but it's too late to stop the final pattern." Claire stepped forward. "We'll see about that. The spiral ends tonight." Evelyn smiled faintly. "The spiral cannot end. You don't understand the rhythm, the flow, the inevitability. Step in the wrong line, and you will be part of it." Emily pointed to the symbols on the ground. "We follow the spiral. Step on the lines. That's how we control it." Navigating the spiral. Using Emily's guidance, Claire and Mercer stepped carefully along the spirals etched into the dirt. The patterns seemed to pulse under their feet, almost guiding them, almost resisting them. Every movement, every choice, had to align perfectly with the lines or the mechanism would trigger fully. Evelyn moved alongside them, watching their every step. "Careful," she whispered. "One misstep and the cycle completes. The mechanism will claim everything." Mercer glanced at her. "Then you know how to stop it?" Evelyn's smile faded. "Perhaps, but the cost is high." Claire ignored her and focused on the spirals. Emily's small hands traced each line, directing their path. The concentric circles tightened as they moved inward, and Claire realized something horrifying. The closer they got to the center, the more dangerous it became. Hidden traps, some physical, some psychological, had been designed to punish mistakes. The hidden traps. The first trap was subtle, a sudden depression in the ground that acted as a tripwire. Mercer narrowly avoided it, lunging to the side. The second was a mirror array hidden among the trees, designed to disorient anyone stepping off the path. Claire caught herself on a branch as a hidden cable swung toward her, almost cutting her arm. "This is insane," she muttered. "The architect has been planning this for decades." Emily's voice was calm, almost unnaturally so. "Step only where the spirals touch. Every other space is danger." The final obstacle was a pit in the very center of the clearing, disguised as a solid surface. Claire recognized it from old photographs of Hollow Creek, long believed to be folklore. "It's a trap," she whispered. "It's meant to swallow anyone who reaches the center unprepared." Emily's fingers trembled slightly on the notebook. "No, we can control it. We just have to complete the pattern perfectly." Activating the mechanism. At last, they reached the center of the spirals. Symbols etched in stone, dirt, and tree bark converged into a glowing nexus. The air hummed, and shadows twisted unnaturally around them. Evelyn stepped forward, raising her hands. "You've done well to reach this point. But the mechanism, it's already alive. The spiral is about to complete its cycle." Claire stared at the pattern beneath her feet. "It's not alive, it's a machine. And every machine has a flaw. Every pattern can be broken." Emily placed her hands on the symbols, tracing the final sequence. Her voice rang out, firm and commanding. "We complete it on our terms. The spiral ends tonight." A pulse ran through the clearing, a shockwave of energy that bent shadows and twisted light. The nodes around the forest flickered like candles in a storm. The final mechanism had been activated, but they controlled the sequence, moving carefully along the lines. Evelyn's expression twisted from amusement to panic. "No, you can't stop it." Mercer held his ground. "We already have." Disrupting the spiral. Claire and Emily worked in tandem, following the spiral's instructions precisely. Emily traced patterns with her hands while Claire reinforced the nodes with physical markers, sticks, stones, and chalk. Each step disrupted the hidden traps, neutralizing the orchestrators' control over the clearing. The spirals pulsed faster, almost angry at being disrupted. The fog thickened, voices whispered in the mist, and shadows surged toward them. "Almost there," Emily whispered, guiding them along the final lines. "One more step, one more line, the center." Claire and Mercer moved together, stepping into the very heart of the spiral. The pulse of the mechanism hit them, a force that threatened to throw them off balance, but Emily's focus held it steady. The spirals converged, and then silence. The shadows recoiled. The air cleared. The pulse vanished. Evelyn fell to her knees, staring in disbelief. Impossible, the cycle broken. Emily's small hand remained steady on the notebook. It's over, she said simply. The spiral ends. Hollow Creek is free. Aftermath of the mechanism. The clearing was quiet now, the mist dissipating. Claire and Mercer helped Emily to her feet, looking at the spiral patterns etched into the dirt. They had dismantled the orchestrator's machine, disrupted the nodes, and neutralized the traps. Evelyn, restrained and defeated, glared at them. You may have stopped this cycle, but the spiral, it will return. Others will rise to continue it. Claire met her gaze evenly. Then we'll be ready. Hollow Creek won't fall silent again. Mercer nodded. We've broken the network, neutralized the traps, and protected the town. For now, that's enough. Emily looked around at the clearing, the surviving nodes, and the remnants of the spiral. It feels lighter, she whispered. Like something that's been holding the town in place for decades is finally gone. Claire put a hand on her shoulder. It's gone because you saw it, Emily. You read the pattern. And you helped us break it. Mercer added, the spiral may have started generations ago, but tonight, it ends with us. A town freed. As dawn broke over Hollow Creek, the fog lifted entirely. Birds returned to the trees, the wind softened, and the town seemed to breathe again. The nodes were dismantled, the hidden houses exposed, and the orchestrator's influence disrupted. Claire and Mercer looked over the town from a hilltop, Emily between them. Hollow Creek was alive, but no longer trapped in a cycle of fear and disappearance. Emily's notebook, once filled with spirals and danger, now lay open with blank pages. The patterns had been broken, but the knowledge remained, a tool to prevent future cycles. Claire exhaled slowly. It's over for now. The final mechanism is stopped. Mercer nodded. And Hollow Creek finally has a chance to heal. Emily smiled faintly. The spiral is over. We made sure of it. Somewhere, in the shadows beyond the town, faint remnants of the spiral still lingered. But the machine that had haunted generations of Hollow Creek was no longer in control. The town had survived the architect's ultimate plan, and for the first time in decades, the cycle was broken. The night after the final mechanism was dismantled, Hollow Creek was eerily silent. The fog that had haunted the town for weeks had thinned, retreating into the distant woods, leaving the streets cold and still. For Claire Whitman, Officer Daniel Mercer, and Emily, that silence was deceptive. They knew the spiral's influence might have been broken, but the network that sustained it was not completely gone. Someone, or some group, had survived. They had watched the disruption from the shadows, and now, with the orchestrator's authority in question, the remaining followers were desperate. The collapse of the spiral's control would not come quietly. The first signs. It began subtly. Traffic lights blinked erratically. Dogs barked wildly. Faint whispers seemed to echo through the streets, though no one was there. Claire stood at the command tent, staring at the map, feeling the pulse of the town like a heartbeat. They're moving, she said. The network hasn't completely dissolved. The spiral may be broken, but the people sustaining it are still active. Mercer checked his radio. Reports of trespassers, shadowy figures near the creek, and several alarms triggered in abandoned buildings. They're regrouping, probably to reclaim control. Emily's small hands trembled slightly as she clutched her notebook. The spiral, it's reacting. They're trying to restart it. If they succeed, everything we've done could unravel. Claire's jaw tightened. Then we stop them, before it's too late. Hollow Creek on edge. The team quickly organized patrols throughout the town, covering every known node, abandoned house, and secret passage. Volunteers and officers were stationed at strategic points, flashlights cutting through the fog that lingered along the creek and sidewalks. Claire and Mercer moved in tandem, coordinating via radio. Every detail Emily revealed from the spirals was followed precisely, predicting the movements of the remaining agents. Suddenly, a series of screams echoed from the east end of town, the old school playground, one of the spiral's key nodes. Mercer grabbed his flashlight, racing toward the sound. Emily, Claire shouted, we need your guidance. Every line, every path, what do we do? Emily spread her notebook open, tracing lines with her finger. The spiral is collapsing in that area. Follow the path exactly, don't deviate, or the traps will activate. The playground trap. When they arrived, the scene was chaotic. Shadows moved faster than the eye could follow. Children's swings creaked despite no wind, and broken glass littered the ground. Mercer ducked just as a cable, rigged as a trip line, swung toward his face. Claire saw Evelyn's followers. 2 of the captured agents had escaped, returning to salvage the spiral's remnants. They wielded improvised weapons and moved with unnatural speed, orchestrating the collapse to reclaim control of the town. "Step on the lines," Emily shouted, pointing to the spirals etched faintly into the dirt. Claire followed Emily's guidance precisely, each footfall neutralizing invisible triggers. Mercer tackled one of the agents, while Emily pulled another child from the middle of the chaos. The town itself seemed to tremble, the spiral's influence pulsing through the ground like a heartbeat gone mad. Mercer pinned the agent to the ground. "It's over. Stand down." The agent snarled, twisting with unnatural strength, but Mercer held firm. Claire and Emily moved the children to safety, making sure every node in the playground was secured. The spiral reacts. Even as the agents were captured, Emily's fingers traced the notebook frantically. "The spiral is unstable. It's collapsing inward. If we don't act quickly, the mechanism could explode, physically, not just symbolically." Claire frowned. "Explode?" Emily nodded. "The final mechanism was more than symbolic. It's tied to hidden devices in the town, energy sources hidden at each node. If the collapse continues unchecked, it could destroy buildings, bridges, even the creek area. We have to finish this." Mercer's eyes widened. "Then we need to reach the center again. The clearing, the nexus of the spiral." Racing to the clearing. The trio moved fast, guided by Emily's notebook. The fog swirled violently now, twisting and forming almost tangible shapes around them. Shadows elongated unnaturally, as if the spiral itself was resisting their advance. Every step toward the clearing revealed new traps. Rotting branches had been sharpened into spikes, false floors threatened to collapse, and hidden cables swung across their path. Mercer defused a trap just in time, while Claire directed Emily along the safe lines of the spirals. "We can't afford mistakes," Claire muttered. "Every misstep strengthens the spiral's influence." Emily's voice was steady despite the fear in her eyes. "We're almost there. One more node, one more line, the clearing." The confrontation. When they reached the clearing, they were met with chaos. Fog had thickened to a near-solid wall, twisting around the ancient oak trees. Hidden followers of the architect had gathered, attempting to reignite the spiral by activating the nodes with a new cycle. Evelyn herself was there, her calm demeanor gone, replaced by desperation. "You think you can stop this?" she shouted. "The spiral cannot be destroyed. It lives beyond you." Claire stepped forward. "The spiral ends tonight." Emily raised her notebook. "We know the paths, the lines, the nodes. We control it now." Mercer moved alongside them, covering their flanks. "Anyone who tries to interfere dies here." Breaking the nodes. Using Emily's guidance, they moved from node to node, deactivating hidden mechanisms, cables, tripwires, and even small explosive charges rigged under boards and trees. Each step followed the spiral exactly, neutralizing the traps as they progressed. Evelyn tried to interfere, moving quickly, using her knowledge of the nodes to attempt to trap them again. Mercer intercepted, grappling her while Claire and Emily finished disrupting the final nodes. "Step here," Emily shouted. "Now Claire." Claire stepped precisely on the line marked in the notebook. A pulse ran through the clearing, more controlled than the earlier chaotic collapse. The shadows twisted violently, and then began to dissipate. Mercer shouted, holding Evelyn down. "It's done. The spiral's influence is gone." Evelyn's face twisted in disbelief. "Impossible. You can't. The cycle." Emily shook her head. "The cycle ends because we control the spiral now. Not you." The town saved. As the fog cleared, the remaining agents were apprehended. The town, once suffused with the spiral's unnatural influence, felt lighter, almost alive in a new way. Birds returned to the trees, the creek sparkled in the first sunlight of the morning, and the residents, many of whom had been unknowingly caught in the spiral, emerged from their homes, safe at last. Claire and Mercer helped Emily down from the clearing, looking over the town. Hollow Creek had survived. Emily smiled faintly, holding her notebook. "It's over. The spiral can't hurt anyone anymore." Claire hugged her lightly. "You were the key, Emily. Your understanding, your courage, it saved the town." Mercer glanced toward the horizon, watching the sun rise over Hollow Creek. "We faced the architect, dismantled the nodes, and disrupted the final mechanism. The spiral's power is gone for now." Emily nodded. "We've broken the cycle, and we've made sure it won't happen again." A fragile piece. The town was safe, but Claire, Mercer, and Emily knew the memory of the spiral would linger. The architect had been defeated, the nodes dismantled, and the final mechanism neutralized. But the legacy of decades of manipulation and terror had left its mark. Hollow Creek's residents would need time to heal, and the trio would need to remain vigilant in case anyone attempted to rebuild the spiral. Claire looked at the clearing, now bathed in sunlight. "The collapse is over, but the lessons remain. We know how the spiral worked, and we know how to stop it if it ever rises again." Mercer placed a hand on Emily's shoulder. "You've done more than anyone could imagine. Hollow Creek owes you its life." Emily smiled faintly, looking around at the trees, the creek, and the now empty nodes. "It feels lighter, like something terrible has finally been lifted." Claire nodded. "It has, and we've seen the true cost of the spiral, how far people will go to maintain it, and how careful we must be to prevent it from ever returning." The town had survived the collapse. The spiral had been broken, but the echoes of its deadly patterns would linger in Hollow Creek, a reminder of the architect's cunning and the power of generations-old secrets. The morning sun broke over Hollow Creek with a golden glow that seemed almost impossible after weeks of mist, fear, and chaos. Birds sang again, and the gentle rush of the creek echoed through the town, a quiet reminder that life persisted even after the horrors that had gripped the streets. For Claire Whitman, Officer Daniel Mercer, and Emily, the day carried both relief and the heavy weight of what had been lost, and what had been uncovered. The spiral, the orchestrators' network, and the centuries-old patterns of manipulation had been dismantled. But justice, Claire knew, would take more than disrupting the mechanisms. It would require accountability. The town awakens. Residents emerged cautiously from their homes. Some were confused, others fearful, but most were grateful. For years, Hollow Creek had carried the invisible weight of the spiral. Children who disappeared without explanation, families haunted by unexplained absences, and whispers of an ancient, unseen hand guiding events. Emily walked through the town square, notebook in hand, tracing invisible spirals with her finger. "It's safe now," she whispered. "The patterns are gone. No one else will be taken." Mercer surveyed the streets, eyes scanning for any lingering threats. "The network may be disrupted, but the town still carries the legacy of what happened here. People need protection, guidance, closure." Claire nodded. "And that starts today. We make sure Hollow Creek remembers what the spiral was, and how it ended. We honor the victims, the arrests. The remaining followers of the architect were rounded up. Some were complicit knowingly. Others had been coerced, manipulated, or deceived into participating. Each was carefully interrogated, the full scope of the spiral laid bare. Evelyn Marsh, the architect, remained at the center of it all. She had been restrained, but her composure was unwavering. "You think this ends with me?" she said quietly during her interrogation. "The spiral has always existed. You may have stopped it for now, but it will return." Claire leaned forward, voice firm. "Not while we're here. You manipulated generations of children, controlled a town, and instilled fear for decades. That ends with you. You'll answer for every life you've taken and every family you've destroyed." Evelyn's eyes narrowed, but she said nothing. Her silence was a concession of defeat. Mercer placed her in a waiting transport, ensuring she would be held accountable and brought to trial, unraveling the spiral's legacy. The town worked with investigators to dismantle the remaining nodes. Abandoned houses were secured or demolished. Hidden tunnels and rooms were exposed. Symbols etched into walls and floors were documented and destroyed. Claire oversaw the process, ensuring no trace of the spiral remained. "We have to make sure the town is safe," she said. "Every mechanism, every trap, every hidden line of influence gone. Hollow Creek deserves a future without fear." Emily helped by cross-referencing her notebook with old town records. "Some of the patterns go back decades, even centuries," she said softly. "We've removed the ones that matter, but the history still exists." Mercer added, "And we document it. The next generation will know the truth. Hollow Creek will remember, not to live in fear, but to ensure it never happens again. Community healing. The town held a gathering in the main square. Families reunited with children who had been hidden, missing, or manipulated into the spiral. Stories were shared, grief expressed, and courage celebrated. Emily, small and quiet, stood beside Claire and Mercer. "We did it," she whispered. "The spiral can't hurt anyone now." Claire put an arm around her. "We did it together, and now the town can begin to heal." Mercer nodded. "It won't be easy. The memories are strong, and the fear runs deep. But Hollow Creek survived, and that's what matters." A local resident approached Emily, tears in her eyes. "Thank you," she said. "You saved my daughter, and so many others. Hollow Creek owes you its life." Emily smiled faintly, clutching her notebook. "We just followed the lines. The spiral guided us, but we chose to end it." Confronting the past. Claire and Mercer walked through the town later that day, reflecting on the events that had shaken Hollow Creek. Every street, every building, every tree now held the memory of the spiral, but the power it once held had been broken. "They were organized," Mercer said. "Decades of planning, years of observation, and they used the town itself as a weapon." Claire nodded. "The architect was brilliant, terrifying, but we saw through the patterns. We disrupted the nodes. We stopped the mechanism before it could claim another life." Emily joined them, notebook in hand. I wish it didn't have to be this way," she said softly. "So many were hurt, and for what?" Claire knelt beside her. "Sometimes, understanding the pattern is the first step to breaking it. You've helped save this town, Emily. That's more than most could ever do." Mercer added, "And the spiral's legacy ends with us. The town remembers, the network is dismantled, and justice will follow. That's what matters. Justice served." Evelyn Marsh faced trial in a packed courtroom. Evidence from decades of spirals, nodes, and orchestrated disappearances was presented. Survivors testified, their stories echoing through the chambers. The judge delivered a verdict that resonated through Hollow Creek, guilty on all counts. Sentences were given to the remaining followers, reflecting their roles in perpetuating the spiral. Outside the courthouse, Claire, Mercer, and Emily watched as justice was served. The weight of decades of terror had been lifted, and the town could begin its slow recovery. Emily whispered, "It's finally over." Claire squeezed her hand. "It's over because we stood together, because we followed the patterns, saw the nodes, and broke the spiral. That's what justice looks like." Mercer nodded. "And Hollow Creek will remember it, not as a town trapped by fear, but as a town that survived it." A new beginning. In the weeks following the trial, Hollow Creek began to heal. The children returned to school, families rebuilt their lives, and the town slowly shed the shadow of the spiral. Emily's notebook, once filled with danger and foreboding, was carefully archived. The spirals were studied not as a means of prediction, but as a lesson, a record of a cycle that had been stopped. Claire and Mercer remained in the town, serving as guardians and guides. They taught residents how to recognize patterns, understand risks, and prevent manipulation. The spiral had been defeated, but vigilance would ensure it never returned. On a hill overlooking Hollow Creek, the three of them stood together, watching the sun set over a town reborn. Emily smiled faintly. "It feels lighter. Free." Claire nodded. "It is. Hollow Creek is free. And that freedom is because of you, Emily. You saw the spiral, you understood it, and you helped end it." Mercer added, "And we'll make sure it stays free. Justice has been served, but the work of healing begins now." Reflection. The spiral had tested them, threatened them, and haunted Hollow Creek for generations. It had claimed lives, twisted families, and manipulated the very streets of the town. But in the end, courage, insight, and determination had dismantled it. Claire thought of every child saved, every trap neutralized, and every node destroyed. She thought of Emily, who had seen what no one else could. And she thought of Hollow Creek itself, a town scarred but alive, resilient, and free at last. The architect had tried to control life, death, and fate through the spiral, but humanity had prevailed. Through strategy, bravery, and unity, the spiral was broken. Hollow Creek would never forget the darkness it had endured, but it would also remember the light, the justice, the courage, and the end of the spiral's reign. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the town stood in quiet peace. The spiral had collapsed. The architect had been unmasked and brought to justice. And for the first time in generations, Hollow Creek could breathe freely again. Story 1. At exactly 12:03 a.m., the phone rang. Detective Aaron Hale stared at the glowing screen from across his dark apartment. He had been half asleep on his couch, the television casting flickering blue shadows across the room. Outside, rain hammered against the windows, and thunder rumbled through the quiet streets of Portland, Oregon. The phone rang again. Aaron frowned. Very few people had his private number. Fewer still would call him after midnight, especially after he had taken leave from the department 6 months ago following a case that had nearly destroyed him. The phone stopped. Silence swallowed the apartment, broken only by rain tapping against the glass like impatient fingers. Then it rang again. Aaron sighed and reached for it, expecting a wrong number or a drunken caller. But when he glanced at the screen, his stomach dropped. Unknown caller. He hesitated before answering. Hello? For several seconds, there was only static. Then, a voice whispered through the line. Detective Hale, you failed them. Aaron sat upright instantly. His pulse slammed against his ribs. Who is this? The voice ignored his question. They're still out there, and tonight, another one will disappear. The line went dead. Aaron stared at the phone, frozen. His breathing grew shallow. His mind raced back to a case he had tried and failed to solve. A string of disappearances known as the Midnight Vanishings. Over 3 years, 9 people had disappeared without a trace, all taken between midnight and 12:15 a.m. No bodies, no suspects, no witnesses, and the case had ended his career. Aaron shook his head, trying to dismiss the call as a sick prank. But then his phone vibrated again. A text message appeared from the same unknown number. Check the news. Aaron grabbed the remote and turned the volume up on the muted television. A breaking news alert flashed across the screen. Police are responding to a missing person report in downtown Portland. A 23-year-old woman, Emily Carter, was last seen leaving her workplace at approximately midnight. Aaron's chest tightened. He leaned forward, gripping the edge of the coffee table. The Midnight Vanishings had started exactly like this. The ghost of a failed case. 6 months earlier, Aaron had been Portland PD's lead detective on the Vanishings. Each victim had shared eerie similarities. They were all alone. They disappeared within a 15-minute window after midnight. No surveillance footage ever captured the abduction, and at each last known location, investigators found a single object left behind. A pocket watch, always stopped at 12:03 a.m. Aaron had chased the case obsessively, working sleepless nights, mapping victim routines, interviewing families, and analyzing evidence that never led anywhere. The case eventually collapsed under pressure. Leads dried up. The department reassigned him after he suffered what they politely called emotional exhaustion. Aaron called it failure. And now, someone had just predicted another disappearance. The evidence returns. Aaron's phone buzzed again. Another message. This time it contained a photo. His hands trembled as he opened it. The image showed a rain-soaked sidewalk illuminated by a flickering street lamp. Resting near a storm drain was a silver pocket watch. The hands pointed to 12:03 a.m. Aaron stood abruptly, adrenaline flooding his system. The photo included GPS coordinates. He grabbed his coat, keys, and gun before he could talk himself out of it. The crime scene. The rain intensified as Aaron pulled up to the location 20 minutes later. Red and blue lights flashed ahead, reflecting across puddles and wet asphalt. Police tape flapped violently in the wind. Uniformed officers moved around the scene, taking photographs and speaking with witnesses. Aaron stepped out of his car, heart pounding. He knew he shouldn't be here. He was no longer assigned to the case. But instinct pulled him forward like gravity. He ducked under the tape before an officer noticed him. The pocket watch sat exactly where the photo had shown it, glistening beneath the streetlight. Crime scene techs worked carefully around it. Then a familiar voice spoke behind him. I was wondering how long it would take you to show up. Aaron turned. Detective Lena Ortiz stood with her arms crossed, rain dripping from her dark hair. She had replaced Aaron as lead investigator after his leave. Her expression mixed frustration and concern. You're not assigned to this anymore, she said. Aaron held up his phone silently. She glanced at the screen. Her face paled. You got that message too, she whispered. Aaron froze. What do you mean 2? Lena pulled out her phone and showed him. The exact same photo. The exact same message. Sent at 12:04 a.m. The witness. An officer approached them. Detectives, he said, nodding toward Lena but eyeing Aaron suspiciously. We found someone who might have seen something. They followed him to a trembling young man sitting under a nearby awning. He was soaked, shivering, clutching a coffee cup like a lifeline. I didn't see their face, he stammered. Lena crouched beside him. That's okay. Just tell us what you did see. The man swallowed hard. There was a van. Black. No license plate. It just appeared out of nowhere. The girl was walking toward the bus stop. Then the van doors opened and... He stopped, his breathing quickening. And what? Aaron pressed. The witness looked directly at him, eyes wide with terror. They didn't touch her, he whispered. Aaron frowned. What do you mean? She just walked into the van, like she was being called. The rain thundered louder around them. A message from the past. Back at the sidewalk, Lena carefully lifted the pocket watch using gloved hands. She turned it over. An engraving covered the back. Aaron leaned closer, dread crawling through his veins. It read, 10 must complete the circle. Lena looked at him slowly. There were 9 victims before tonight, she said. Aaron nodded grimly. This makes Emily Carter number 10. The chilling discovery. As crime scene techs continued their work, one of them called out, Detective Ortiz, you need to see this. They approached the storm drain where the watch had been found. Inside, partially hidden beneath debris, lay a small envelope sealed in plastic. Lena opened it carefully. Inside was a folded photograph. Aaron's breath caught when he saw it. It showed 10 people standing in a circle photographed from above, in what looked like an abandoned warehouse. 9 of the faces were recognizable from previous missing person files. The 10th face belonged to Emily Carter. But what froze Aaron completely? Standing in the center of the circle was a shadowed figure wearing an old-fashioned coat and hat. And scrawled across the bottom of the photograph in jagged handwriting, Midnight is almost complete. The final call. Aaron's phone rang again. Both he and Lena stared at it. Unknown caller. Slowly he answered. The same whisper filled the line. You're too late, detective, but you're finally paying attention. Aaron clenched his jaw. Who are you? A quiet chuckle echoed through the static. I'm the one who watches the clock. Aaron stepped closer to the storm drain, gripping the phone tightly. Why me? He demanded. The voice answered calmly. Because you were the only one who ever came close to understanding, and I want you to witness the ending. The call ended. Aaron lowered the phone slowly. Rain poured around him. Sirens wailed in the distance. The weight of the case he thought he had buried pressed down on him harder than ever before. 10 victims. A secret ritual. A killer who was watching him personally. And somewhere out there, Emily Carter was still alive. For now. Aaron turned to Lena, his voice steady but filled with resolve. This isn't over, he said. She nodded. No, she agreed. It's just beginning. The rain refused to stop. By the time Detective Lena Ortiz and Aaron Hale returned to Portland Police Headquarters, the storm had intensified into a relentless downpour, rattling the building's windows like an impatient warning. Inside the bullpen, fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting a sterile glow across desks cluttered with case files, coffee cups, and evidence folders that never seemed to shrink. But tonight, something had changed. The Midnight Vanishings case, once labeled inactive, had just roared back to life. And now it had a 10th victim. The war room reopens. Lena pushed open the heavy glass door of the cold case conference room. Dust floated through the air as she flipped on the lights, revealing a space frozen in time. Corkboards still lined the walls, cluttered with photographs of missing persons, crime scene maps, and notes written in faded marker ink. Aaron stepped inside slowly, his chest tightening as memories rushed back. He had built this room during the original investigation. Every thread of string, every pinned photograph, every timeline chart had been his attempt to create order out of chaos. Now it felt like walking into a graveyard of failures. Lena placed Emily Carter's photo at the center of the board. She's officially been missing for 2 hours, Lena said quietly. Witnesses confirm she left her job at exactly 11:57 p.m. Security cameras show her walking toward the bus stop at midnight. Aaron nodded grimly. And the cameras go out at 12:02. Just like the others, Lena replied. She handed him a tablet displaying surveillance footage recovered from nearby stores. Aaron watched Emily step into frame, her umbrella tilted against the rain. She looked exhausted but calm, checking her phone as she walked. At exactly 12:02 a.m., the footage glitched. The screen filled with static for 6 seconds. When the image returned, Emily was gone. Aaron exhaled slowly. "He's improving," he said. Lena raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" Aaron leaned forward. Before, he relied on blind spots or damaged cameras. Now he's actively disrupting surveillance. That means resources, planning, technology, and confidence, Lena added. The victim profile. They moved to Emily's background file. Her life appeared painfully ordinary. 23 years old. Graduate student studying psychology. Part-time barista at a downtown coffee shop. No criminal record. No known enemies. She doesn't match a pattern, Lena said, flipping through the pages. Different age range than most previous victims. Different background. No shared workplaces, schools, or social circles. Aaron stared at the victim timeline pinned to the board. "There is a pattern," he said quietly. "We just haven't seen it yet." He began rearranging photographs, placing them into chronological order. 9 faces stared back at him. Men and women, aged 19 to 45, each taken months apart. Lena crossed her arms. "You still think this is ritualistic?" Aaron gestured toward the photograph they had found in the storm drain. The circle of 10 victims. "He's building something," Aaron said. "Or finishing something. The watchmaker's signature." Forensic results from the pocket watch arrived faster than expected. A technician entered the room carrying a sealed evidence bag. "We ran prints," she said. "Nothing usable. But there's something else." She placed the watch on the table. "It's antique. Late 1800s craftsmanship. Rare internal gearing. These were custom made by a clockmaker named Elias Varn." Aaron frowned. "I've never heard of him." "That's because he disappeared in 1894, the technician replied. "But here's the strange part." She handed Aaron a report. Every watch found in previous disappearances traces back to the same manufacturer. Lena leaned closer. "You're telling me all 10 watches came from the same clockmaker, over 100 years ago?" The technician nodded. "And they're all still perfectly functional, except they're intentionally stopped at 12:03 a.m. The first break." Aaron grabbed his coat. "Where are you going?" Lena asked. "To the historical archives. The forgotten clockmaker." The Portland Historical Society occupied a converted Victorian mansion on the edge of downtown. Inside, rows of aging records, photographs, and newspaper archives stretched across dimly lit rooms filled with the scent of dust and yellowed paper. Archivist Daniel Mercer greeted them reluctantly as thunder cracked outside. "You're looking for Elias Varn?" he asked nervously. "Most people don't request those files." Aaron exchanged a glance with Lena. "Why not?" Mercer hesitated before leading them into a restricted storage room. "Because Varn was involved in something disturbing." He placed an old ledger onto a wooden table and opened it carefully. Inside were newspaper clippings from the late 1800s. Aaron read aloud. "Clockmaker Elias Varn suspected in disappearance of apprentices. Local children vanish near Varn's workshop. Investigation ends after workshop burns to ground. Varn presumed dead." Lena frowned. "How many children disappeared?" Mercer swallowed. 10. Silence filled the room. Aaron's pulse quickened. 10 victims then. 10 victims now. The workshop ruins. Mercer handed them a brittle map showing the location of Varn's workshop before it burned down. Aaron studied the address. His stomach twisted. "That location," he said quietly. Lena leaned closer. "What?" "It's exactly where the abandoned Harrow textile warehouse stands today." Lena stiffened. "That warehouse was searched during the original investigation," she said. Aaron shook his head slowly. "Not thoroughly enough. The warehouse search." The rain had softened to a steady drizzle by the time they arrived at the abandoned warehouse. Rust covered the metal doors, and broken windows gaped like hollow eyes across the brick facade. Police units surrounded the building after Lena secured a search warrant. Inside, flashlights pierced thick darkness. Dust swirled in the air as officers moved cautiously through rows of rotting machinery and collapsed shelving. Aaron walked deeper into the structure, his instincts screaming that something was wrong. Then he saw it, a staircase descending beneath the factory floor. He exchanged a glance with Lena. Neither spoke. They moved down together. The hidden chamber. The basement smelled of damp concrete and decay. Their flashlights revealed something that made Aaron's breath catch. 10 metal chairs sat arranged in a perfect circle. Chains dangled from each armrest. In the center stood a tall grandfather clock. Its pendulum swung slowly. Tick, tock, tick, tock. The time read 12:02 a.m. Lena whispered, "My God!" Aaron stepped closer to the clock. Carvings covered its wooden frame, intricate spiral designs etched into the surface. Then he noticed something else. A recording device attached to the base. It was blinking red. Active. Aaron pressed play. Static crackled before the whispering voice filled the room. "Welcome back, Detective Hale." Aaron froze. "I wondered how long it would take you to find my sanctuary." Lena scanned the room, her hand hovering near her weapon. "If you're hearing this," the voice continued, "it means the 10th hour is approaching." Aaron clenched his fists. "Where is she?" he muttered under his breath. The voice continued. "You see, every century requires balance. 10 souls to reset the clock." Elias Varn understood this. "I simply continue his work." Aaron's blood ran cold. "You failed to stop the 9th hour. Now you will witness the 10th. The recording ended abruptly. The terrifying discovery. One of the officers called out from the far corner. "Detectives! Over here!" They rushed toward him. Behind a false wall panel, officers had uncovered a hidden storage room. Inside, 10 glass display cases lined the walls. 9 of them contained personal belongings from previous victims. Wallets, shoes, jewelry, photographs. But the 10th case was empty. At the bottom of it lay a single piece of paper. Aaron picked it up carefully. His heart pounded as he read the message. "She still has time." Below it, coordinates. Racing against midnight. Aaron checked his watch. 11:41 p.m. Less than 20 minutes before midnight. Lena grabbed her radio, shouting for units to mobilize. "Where do the coordinates lead?" she asked urgently. Aaron stared at his phone screen, dread creeping into his chest. "The old waterfront clock tower," he said. Lena's eyes widened. "That place has been abandoned for decades." Aaron nodded. "And if he's following ritual patterns?" He swallowed hard. "Emily Carter will be there when the clock strikes 12:03. The storm outside began to rage again as sirens erupted through the city. Police vehicles sped toward the waterfront, their lights cutting through rain and darkness. Somewhere in Portland, a killer was preparing to complete a ritual that had lasted over a century. And for the first time since the midnight vanishings began, Aaron Hale might finally have a chance to stop it. Or die trying. Rain lashed against the windshield as Detective Lena Ortiz pushed her cruiser through Portland's nearly empty waterfront district. Sirens wailed behind them as backup units raced to catch up, their lights flashing red and blue across slick pavement and abandoned storefronts. Beside her, Aaron Hale stared at the digital clock on the dashboard. 11:52 p.m. 11 minutes. The city blurred past in streaks of neon reflections and shadow. The Columbia River churned violently beside the road, wind driving waves against the seawall like fists pounding from beneath the surface. Aaron's mind moved faster than the cruiser. "He wants us there," he said quietly. Lena didn't look away from the road. "I know. He sent the coordinates. He left the recording. This is part of the ritual. You think it's a trap?" Aaron exhaled slowly. "I think everything he does is a trap." The tower in the storm. The waterfront clock tower rose into view through the rain, its silhouette jagged and skeletal against the lightning-split sky. Built in 1901 as part of Portland's original shipping terminal, it had been abandoned for decades after structural damage forced its closure. The massive clock face still loomed over the river, its hands frozen at 12:03. Aaron's stomach tightened. "That's not coincidence," he muttered. Police vehicles screeched to a stop around the tower's perimeter. Officers fanned out quickly, weapons drawn, flashlights cutting through the storm-dark night. Lena grabbed her radio. "All units, secure exits and maintain perimeter. Nobody enters or leaves without confirmation." Aaron was already stepping out into the rain. "Hey," Lena called, grabbing his arm. We do this by the book. Aaron met her gaze. She has 11 minutes, he said. Lena hesitated, then nodded. Stay close, she said. Entering the ritual site, the tower's rusted double doors groaned as officers forced them open. Wind howled through broken windows high above, sending loose debris skittering across the stone floor. Inside, the structure smelled of mold, rust, and river rot. Spiral staircases wrapped around the inner walls, disappearing upward into darkness. The only sound was the steady dripping of rainwater leaking through the ceiling. Then they heard it. Tick, tock, tick, tock. Aaron froze. The sound echoed from somewhere above. Clock mechanism, Lena whispered. No, Aaron said quietly. It's bait. The ascent. They moved up the spiral staircase cautiously, their boots echoing against metal steps slick with condensation. Backup officers followed several flights below, securing each level as they climbed. Aaron checked his watch. 11:56 p.m. Lightning flashed through broken windows, illuminating peeling paint and graffiti scrawled across the tower walls. But something else caught Aaron's attention. Symbols. Spiral carvings etched directly into the metal supports, identical to the ones they had seen in the underground chamber. He's marking the structure, Aaron said. Lena ran her flashlight over the carvings. Or consecrating it, she said grimly. The Chamber of 10. They reached the final landing, just beneath the clock mechanism room. The door at the top stood slightly ajar. The ticking grew louder. Aaron pushed the door open slowly. His breath caught. The massive chamber beneath the clock face had been transformed into something grotesquely ceremonial. 10 tall candles burned in a perfect circle across the floor. 9 of them had already melted nearly to their base. At the center of the circle, Emily Carter sat bound to a metal chair, unconscious, her wrists secured with heavy leather straps. Her soaked clothes clung to her skin, and her head hung forward as if she had been drugged. Aaron rushed toward her. Stop! The voice echoed from the shadows. Aaron froze instantly. A figure stepped forward from behind one of the massive clock gears. He wore a dark wool coat, gloves, and a vintage pocket watch chain dangling from his vest. His face remained partially hidden beneath the brim of an old-fashioned hat. The midnight caller. Face to face. You're early, the man said calmly. Aaron's pulse pounded in his ears. Let her go, he said. The man tilted his head slightly. You misunderstand, Detective Hale. This is history. Precision. Balance. Lena raised her weapon. It's murder, she snapped. The man chuckled softly. Murder is chaotic. What I create is order. Lightning flashed behind him, briefly illuminating his face. Aaron stiffened. The man wasn't old. Mid-30s. Sharp features. Cold, calculating eyes. Who are you? Aaron demanded. The man smiled faintly. I am the Keeper of Midnight. The ritual explained. He gestured toward the giant clock gears grinding slowly above them. Time demands symmetry, he said. Elias Varn understood that. Every century, the city grows corrupt, chaotic, unbalanced. 10 lives restore equilibrium. Aaron shook his head. You're insane. Am I? The Keeper replied calmly. Crime statistics dropped significantly after Varn's final cycle in 1894. Violence decreases. Order returns. Lena scoffed. You're just justifying serial murder with superstition. The Keeper ignored her, his eyes fixed on Aaron. You were the only investigator who recognized the pattern. I followed your work carefully. You nearly found me 6 months ago. Aaron's chest tightened. That warehouse raid, he whispered. Yes, the Keeper replied. I had to accelerate the cycle. The countdown begins. The Keeper pulled out his antique pocket watch. It read 11:59 p.m. The 10th hour must complete the circle, he said calmly, and you get to witness perfection. Aaron took a step forward. I won't let you finish this. The Keeper smiled again. You already failed 9 times. The trap springs. Suddenly, metal doors slammed shut behind them. Lena spun around, shouting into her radio, but static filled the channel. Gas hissed from vents hidden in the walls. Aaron covered his mouth instantly. Sedative, he warned. Officers below shouted as the gas spread through the stairwell. The Keeper stepped calmly toward Emily, raising a syringe filled with clear liquid. 3 minutes, he said. Aaron's vision blurred slightly as the gas thickened. but adrenaline forced him forward. He lunged through the candle circle, tackling the keeper to the ground. The syringe skidded across the floor. Lena fired a warning shot, forcing the keeper to roll away as he scrambled toward the clock mechanism ladder. "You can't stop time," he shouted as he climbed. Aaron ripped Emily's restraints loose, shaking her gently. "Emily, wake up!" Her eyelids fluttered weakly. Above them, gears began grinding faster. Aaron looked up. The keeper was manually forcing the clock forward. The race against time. The giant clock hands outside began moving. 11:59. 12:00. "Lena!" Aaron shouted. "The mechanism!" She sprinted toward the ladder, firing another shot that shattered a gear casing. Sparks rained down as metal screamed in protest. The keeper lost his footing briefly, but continued climbing. "You don't understand," he yelled. "Without the 10th hour, the cycle restarts." "Good," Lena shouted back. Aaron dragged Emily toward the exit while coughing against the thickening gas. She struggled to stay conscious. "Stay with me," he urged. Above them, Lena reached the keeper, slamming him against the gear housing. They fought violently, the massive clock gears roaring inches away. The keeper swung wildly, knocking her flashlight into darkness. But Lena drove her elbow into his jaw and forced him backward into the metal railing. He slipped. For a split second, he dangled over the turning gears. Aaron looked up just as the keeper locked eyes with him. "You can't stop midnight," he whispered. Then he let go. The machinery swallowed him with a deafening metallic scream. Escape before collapse. The gears jammed instantly. The entire clock tower shuddered violently. "Structural failure," Lena shouted, sliding down the ladder. Aaron hoisted Emily over his shoulder as alarms erupted throughout the building. They staggered down the stairwell as concrete cracked and dust rained from the ceiling. Officers below helped drag them toward the exit, just as the upper tower collapsed inward with a thunderous crash. They burst outside into the storm moments before debris exploded through the roof. The clock face shattered, frozen permanently at 12:01 a.m. The aftermath. Paramedics rushed Emily into an ambulance as she finally regained consciousness. Lena leaned against a police cruiser, coughing and soaked, watching emergency crews swarm the collapsing structure. Aaron stood beside her, staring at the broken tower. "He's dead," Lena said quietly. Aaron didn't answer, because deep down, he wasn't sure. The keeper had spoken with absolute certainty. About cycles, about history repeating, and as emergency lights flickered across the river, Aaron couldn't shake the feeling that the ritual had not ended. It had only changed. The rain finally stopped just before sunrise, leaving Portland washed in cold gray silence. Steam rose from the shattered remains of the waterfront clock tower, where firefighters and structural engineers worked cautiously through the unstable debris. Police tape fluttered in the morning wind, and reporters gathered behind barricades, whispering theories into cameras as news helicopters circled overhead. Detective Aaron Hale stood at the perimeter, staring at the wreckage. The tower's upper section had collapsed inward, burying the clock mechanism, and presumably the keeper of midnight, under tons of twisted steel and concrete. Search crews had already located human remains within the destroyed gears, though forensic teams were still working to confirm identity. Beside Aaron, Detective Lena Ortiz sipped bitter coffee from a paper cup. "Medical confirmed Emily Carter is stable," she said. "Mild sedative exposure, dehydration, shock, but she's alive." Aaron nodded silently, relief mixing with unease. They had stopped the ritual. Hadn't they? The survivor's testimony. Emily sat in a hospital bed later that morning, pale but conscious. For tubes ran into her arm, and her hands trembled slightly as she clutched a blanket around her shoulders. Aaron and Lena sat across from her, while a nurse quietly monitored her vitals. "Do you remember what happened?" Lena asked gently. Emily swallowed hard. "I was walking to the bus stop," she said. "Then I heard music." Aaron leaned forward. "Music?" Emily nodded slowly. "A ticking sound like a metronome. It got louder the closer I got to the alley near my bus stop. I thought it was coming from someone's phone or something." Her breathing quickened. "Then I saw him standing beside the van. He didn't touch me. He just looked at me." Aaron's chest tightened. "What happened next?" he asked quietly. Emily stared down at her shaking hands. He opened the van door and said, "Time is calling. She closed her eyes, and I just walked inside. Silence filled the room. The unsettling pattern. Back at headquarters, forensic reports arrived from the clock tower debris. Lena placed the file onto Aaron's desk. They confirmed the body recovered from the gear housing belongs to Marcus Vell, she said. Aaron frowned. That's not the keeper's name. Exactly, Lena replied. She flipped open the report. Marcus Vell was a local horology historian, specialized in antique clock restoration. He had consulted museums, private collectors, and the Portland Historical Society. Aaron's stomach twisted. Daniel Mercer, he said. Lena nodded slowly. Marcus and Mercer worked together on multiple historical preservation projects, including Elias Varn's recovered watch designs. Aaron leaned back, processing. So Marcus Vell was the keeper of midnight, he said. Looks that way, Lena agreed. But someone taught him, Aaron murmured. The hidden office. Investigators searched Marcus Vell's apartment that afternoon. Located above a small antique repair shop, the residence looked deceptively simple. Neatly organized shelves of clock parts, tools arranged with obsessive precision, and dozens of restored antique timepieces ticking in perfect harmony. The sound alone made Aaron's skin crawl. Every clock in the apartment read 12:03 a.m. Lena gestured toward a locked desk drawer. Got something here. Crime scene techs forced it open. Inside, they found a leather-bound journal. Aaron opened it carefully. The handwriting was meticulous, dated entries spanning nearly 15 years. Marcus's personal account of becoming the keeper. The recruitment. Aaron read aloud from the first entry. Daniel says time is sacred. He says Elias Varn discovered something deeper than mechanics, a balance between order and chaos. Lena stiffened. Daniel, she repeated. Aaron flipped forward several pages. Daniel believes the city grows corrupt without intervention. He says Varn understood that sacrifice resets moral decay. Aaron's pulse quickened as he read the final pages. I am ready to complete the 10th hour. Daniel says I will become part of the cycle, and that another will follow me. Aaron closed the journal slowly. The keeper wasn't working alone, he said. Lena nodded grimly. And Daniel Mercer might be the one continuing Varn's original teachings. The archivist vanishes. They rushed back to the Portland Historical Society immediately. But Mercer's office was empty. Shelves were cleared. Files missing. Computer wiped. Only one object remained on his desk. A silver pocket watch. Stopped at 12:03 a.m. Aaron picked it up carefully. An engraving decorated the back. Time requires guardians. The hidden archive. A janitor approached nervously as officers searched the building. You're looking for Mr. Mercer? He asked. Lena nodded. The janitor hesitated before speaking. He had a private archive downstairs, said it held fragile materials not for public access. Aaron and Lena exchanged a glance. Show us, Aaron said. The vault of history. The basement archive room was hidden behind a reinforced steel door, disguised as a storage wall. Inside, rows of locked cabinets stretched into darkness. Inside each cabinet were documents, photographs, and diagrams dating back over a century. Aaron's pulse quickened as he flipped through them. Each century contained a cycle. 1894, Elias Varn. 1994, unknown keeper. 2024, Marcus Vell. Each cycle listed 10 victims. Lena scanned a diagram pinned to the wall. It's not random, she said quietly. Aaron joined her. The diagram mapped Portland's crime rates, economic instability, and population shifts across decades. The cycles always followed periods of rising violence or social unrest. They think they're restoring balance, Aaron said. Lena shook her head. They're playing God. The most terrifying discovery. At the far end of the archive stood a locked cabinet labeled Next Cycle Preparation. Aaron forced it open. Inside lay 10 blank victim profile folders, and beneath them, a typed letter. Aaron read aloud. The 10th hour has been disrupted but not destroyed. The cycle will adapt. The next keeper will begin again when imbalance returns. His throat tightened as he read the signature. D. Mercer. The realization. Lena stepped back slowly. He planned for failure, she whispered. Aaron nodded grimly. This isn't a single killer, he said. It's a lineage. Thunder rumbled faintly outside, though the storm had long passed. Aaron stared at the timeline charts pinned across the walls, each cycle separated by roughly 100 years. But Marcus accelerated the ritual, Lena said. Why? Aaron's eyes narrowed as he studied Marcus's journal again. Because Mercer convinced him imbalance was already starting, he said. And Mercer is still alive, Lena added. The clock continues. Aaron stared at the pocket watch in his hand as it ticked faintly despite being stopped. He's not finished, Aaron said quietly. Lena crossed her arms. What do we do? Aaron looked toward the city skyline through the basement window. We find Mercer before he creates the next keeper, he said. Lena nodded slowly. And if he already has? Aaron exhaled, dread settling in his chest. Then midnight hasn't been stopped. He glanced at the watch. It's only been delayed. As they left the archive, Aaron couldn't shake the chilling truth forming in his mind. The Keeper of Midnight had died inside the tower, but the legacy of the ritual had just begun to reveal itself. The smell of dust and rusted metal lingered in Detective Lena Cross's lungs long after she left the abandoned school. Even as she drove through the quiet suburban streets, her fingers remained stiff on the steering wheel, knuckles pale from gripping it too tightly. The night felt heavier than usual, like the sky itself was pressing down on her. Beside her, the evidence bag rested on the passenger seat. Inside it sat the locket. The tiny silver oval glimmered whenever streetlights passed over it, catching her eye again and again like it was begging for attention. She hadn't opened it yet. She wasn't sure why. Lena had handled hundreds of pieces of evidence throughout her career. Bloodstained knives, torn clothing, letters written by killers who believed they were artists. But this small, delicate object felt different. Personal. Alive. Her phone buzzed through the car's Bluetooth system, snapping her out of the trance. Cross, she answered. Lena, it's Ruiz. Detective Mateo Ruiz sounded tired. He had been stationed at the victim's house all evening, overseeing the forensic sweep. Tell me you've got something, she said. There was a pause, then a slow exhale. You need to come back here. Her stomach tightened. What happened? You're not going to believe it. The Patterson house looked even more unsettling under police floodlights. Blue and red reflections danced across the suburban homes like warning signals to the quiet neighborhood. Officers moved with hushed urgency, their voices low, their expressions tense. Lena parked and stepped out, pulling her jacket tighter around herself as a cold wind swept through the street. Ruiz stood near the front door, holding a tablet and speaking quietly with a forensic tech. When he saw her, he ended the conversation and walked over. You found something? She asked immediately. He nodded slowly. You remember how the crime scene was too clean? Yeah. Well, it's not anymore. He turned and gestured for her to follow him inside. The living room was still partially wrapped in yellow evidence tape. But now something had changed. Lena froze as soon as she stepped through the doorway. The walls. Someone had written on them. Dark crimson letters sprawled across the pale paint in jagged, uneven strokes. The writing circled the room like a twisted mural. Lena felt her pulse slam against her ribs. What the hell? Ruiz swallowed hard. Forensics cleared this room 3 hours ago. The walls were clean. We had 2 officers stationed outside the house the entire time. Lena stepped closer. The message repeated again and again in looping, frantic script. The keeper must continue. Her throat went dry. Any signs of forced entry? She asked quietly. No. Windows. Locked from the inside. Her gaze moved slowly across the walls. The words overlapped in places, growing darker and thicker as if the writer had pressed harder each time. Some letters dripped downward like melting ink. Except it wasn't ink. Lena knew that immediately. Blood? She asked. Ruiz nodded grimly. Forensics is confirming, but, yeah. It looks fresh. Lena turned slowly in the center of the room, scanning every corner. Something about the spacing of the words bothered her. The repetition, the direction of the strokes. Then she noticed it. Near the hallway entrance, slightly separated from the rest, was another message. Smaller, more precise. She opened the door. Lena felt ice creep down her spine. She? Ruiz asked. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she reached into her coat pocket and carefully removed the evidence bag containing the locket. Ruiz's eyes widened slightly. You opened it yet? No. You thinking that's connected? I don't know, she admitted. But I'm starting to think Sarah Patterson wasn't just a victim. Ruiz frowned. What do you mean? Lena stared at the writing again. I think she might have been part of something. Back at the station, the fluorescent lights hummed overhead as Lena sat alone in the evidence room. The rest of the precinct buzzed quietly with late-night activity, but this corner felt isolated, like the world had shrunk down to the metal table in front of her. The locket sat beneath the harsh white light. She stared at it for nearly a full minute before finally pulling on a pair of latex gloves. Just evidence, she muttered to herself. Her fingers trembled slightly as she opened the evidence bag and carefully removed the locket. The silver surface felt colder than expected, almost painfully so, even through the gloves. The hinge was old but sturdy. She hesitated again. Something inside her, instinct maybe, whispered that opening it would change everything. Lena had learned to trust her instincts, but she also knew she couldn't ignore them. With a slow breath, she pressed her thumb against the tiny clasp. Click. The locket opened. Inside were 2 photographs. The first was small and faded, a picture of a young girl, maybe 8 or 9 years old. She had dark hair tied into braids and wide, uncertain eyes staring directly into the camera. Lena leaned closer. There was something haunting about the child's expression. Not sadness, not fear, something deeper, something resigned. She turned the locket slightly to examine the second photo. Her heart skipped. It was Sarah Patterson, but she looked younger, early 20s maybe, standing in front of what appeared to be a large, old house, its windows tall and narrow, its roof sharply angled like something pulled from another century. And behind Sarah, Lena squinted. There was someone else, barely visible in the shadows of the porch, a tall figure, blurred by distance, standing perfectly still. Watching, Lena quickly grabbed her phone and snapped a photo of the image for enhancement. Then she noticed the engraving beneath the pictures, tiny words carved into the silver. She leaned closer, reading silently. To the one who carries the door. Her breath caught. 2 hours later, Lena sat across from Dr. Evelyn Hart, the department's forensic psychologist and unofficial expert on ritualistic crime patterns. Dr. Hart adjusted her glasses as she examined the enlarged image of the locket photos displayed on her computer screen. This house in the background, Hart said slowly. Have you identified it? Not yet, Lena replied, but we're running property records based on architectural matches. Hart nodded thoughtfully, zooming in on the shadowed figure behind Sarah. This reminds me of something. Lena leaned forward. What? Hart hesitated, clearly choosing her words carefully. There have been cases, very rare ones, spread across decades. Victims found with ritualistic elements tied to the idea of guardianship. Custodianship, almost like passing down responsibility. Responsibility for what? Hart looked at her. For containing something. Lena felt her pulse spike. You're talking about cult activity? Not exactly, Hart said. Cults usually revolve around worship. These cases revolve around maintenance. The word made Lena uncomfortable. Maintenance of what? She pressed. Hart folded her hands. In each case, investigators found references to doors, thresholds, barriers between places or states of existence. Symbolic, most likely, but disturbingly consistent. Lena swallowed. And the phrase keeper? Hart nodded slowly. Appears frequently in recovered documents from those cases. Silence filled the room for a long moment. Finally, Lena spoke. Every victim in those cases, what happened to them? Hart's voice dropped almost to a whisper. They were always found alone. Lena waited. Hart continued. And investigators often reported something strange. What? The crime scenes were undisturbed. No signs of struggle. Almost like the victims accepted what happened to them. Lena's chest tightened as Sarah Patterson's still, posed body flashed through her mind. The call came just after midnight. Ruiz's name lit up Lena's phone again. She answered instantly. Tell me you've got something good. His voice was strained. We found the house. Lena stood up immediately. Where? About 30 miles outside the city. Rural property. Been abandoned for at least 20 years according to records. Owner? That's the weird part, Ruiz said. Lena grabbed her jacket. What? The last registered owner. He paused. Was a woman named Eleanor Cross. Lena froze. The world seemed to tilt sideways for a second. That's not funny, Ruiz. I'm not joking. Her mouth went dry. That's my grandmother's name. The drive out of the city felt endless. Street lights faded into long stretches of dark highway, eventually giving way to narrow country roads surrounded by empty fields and skeletal trees clawing at the night sky. Ruiz drove. Lena sat silently in the passenger seat, her thoughts spiraling faster with every mile. My grandmother died when I was 6, she said finally. Ruiz glanced at her briefly. You ever hear about this property? No. You sure? I'm sure. But doubt crept into her voice. She remembered her grandmother vaguely. Soft hands, the scent of lavender, the way she used to hum old lullabies that Lena never recognized. And the stories, strange bedtime stories about doors that shouldn't be opened. Lena had always thought they were just old folk tales. Until now. The house emerged from the darkness like a rotting memory. It matched the photo perfectly. Tall, angular, windows like narrow eyes staring outward. The porch sagged slightly under years of neglect, and the surrounding land was overgrown with wild grass and twisted vines. Police vehicles already lined the dirt road, their lights casting eerie flashes across the decaying structure. Lena stepped out of the car slowly, her breath fogging in the cold air. Ruiz walked beside her as they approached the front gate. You okay? He asked quietly. She nodded, though she wasn't sure it was true. The front door stood slightly open. Officers had set up floodlights around the entrance, but the interior beyond the doorway swallowed light like a black hole. Lena stepped forward, her heartbeat pounding in her ears. As she crossed the threshold, something shifted inside her chest. A strange sensation like stepping into a place she had forgotten but somehow recognized. Dust coated every surface. Furniture sat draped in decaying sheets. The air smelled stale, tinged with something metallic and sour. Clear so far. One of the officers called from deeper inside. Lena moved slowly through the hallway, her flashlight beam slicing through layers of cobwebs. Then she saw it. At the end of the corridor. A door. Unlike the others in the house, this one was made of dark, polished wood. Intricate carvings spiraled across its surface, symbols she didn't recognize but felt strangely drawn to. And hanging from the doorknob, a silver chain, with an empty clasp. Lena reached into her coat pocket, her fingers brushing against the locket. Her breath caught. Behind her, Ruiz whispered, Lena, don't touch it yet. But she barely heard him, because as she stepped closer, she noticed something carved into the frame of the door. Fresh, as if etched recently into the ancient wood. She raised her flashlight and read the words aloud before she could stop herself. The next keeper has returned. Behind them, somewhere deep inside the house, a floorboard creaked. And it wasn't one of the officers. The creak echoed through the hallway like a slow inhale. Every officer inside the house froze. Lena's pulse slammed against her temples as she turned toward the sound. The beam of her flashlight trembled slightly in her hand, slicing across peeling wallpaper and warped floorboards. Dust drifted through the air like pale ghosts disturbed from sleep. Behind her, Ruiz reached for his sidearm. You heard that, right? He whispered. Lena nodded, unable to speak. The noise had come from deeper inside the house. Not from outside. Not from the officers stationed near the front or back entrances. From somewhere within. Another creak followed, softer this time, like weight shifting carefully. Lena swallowed and forced herself to focus. Years of investigative training pushed through the fear tightening her chest. Check positions, she called out. 2 officers responded from the living room. Another answered from the staircase landing upstairs. All accounted for. Except Officer Malik? Ruiz called. Silence. Ruiz's eyes met Lena's. He was sweeping the rear hallway, Ruiz said quietly. Lena turned back toward the dark corridor stretching beyond the carved door. Her instincts screamed that splitting up would be a mistake. Stay together, she ordered. 3 officers quickly regrouped with them. The group moved cautiously down the hallway, flashlights scanning every corner, every shadow. The house groaned around them, wood shifting under the night air, but beneath those ordinary noises, something felt rhythmic. Like breathing. They found Officer Malik near the kitchen entrance. He was standing perfectly still. His flashlight had rolled onto the floor, its beam spinning slowly in circles across cracked tiles. Malik's shoulders were stiff, his posture unnatural, like he had frozen mid-step. "Malik?" Ruiz called carefully. No response. Lena stepped closer. "Officer Malik, are you all right?" The man turned slowly. His face was pale, eyes wide, unfocused. "It moved," he whispered. Ruiz frowned. "What moved?" Malik pointed shakily toward the kitchen doorway. "The wall." The group exchanged uneasy glances. Lena moved past him, stepping into the kitchen. The room looked like it had been abandoned mid-meal decades ago. Rusted pots still hung from hooks. Broken plates sat stacked near a sink filled with dark, stagnant water. Everything was coated in dust. Everything except. She stepped closer to the far wall. A long, narrow section of plaster looked slightly darker than the rest, like it had been disturbed recently. "Flashlight," she said. Ruiz angled his beam beside hers. Together, they examined the surface. Hairline cracks ran vertically along the section. Faint, almost invisible. Lena pressed her gloved fingers gently against it. The wall shifted inward. Ruiz stiffened. "That's not a wall." With slow, careful pressure, Lena pushed again. The plaster panel slid open with a dry scraping sound, revealing a narrow hidden passage descending into darkness. A cold draft spilled out, carrying a faint metallic scent. Malik stepped backward. "I told you it moved." Lena stared into the passage, dread pooling in her stomach. "Back up outside stays put," she ordered. "We go in together." The staircase inside the hidden passage spiraled downward, carved from rough stone rather than wood. The air grew colder with each step, heavier, pressing against their lungs. Their boots echoed faintly, the sound swallowed quickly by the tight corridor. After about 30 steps, the staircase opened into a circular chamber. The room stole the breath from Lena's chest. The walls were lined with shelves, hundreds of them, each filled with objects sealed in glass containers. Lockets, rings, old photographs, journals, keys, pieces of fabric, even small toys yellowed with age. Each item carried a small metal tag with a date engraved into it. Ruiz walked slowly around the perimeter, reading them. "Some of these go back almost a century," he said. Lena's gaze drifted toward the center of the chamber. There stood a pedestal made from dark stone. And resting on top of it, another locket, nearly identical to the one in her pocket. Except this one was open. Inside, instead of photographs, the interior was filled with dark crimson stains that had soaked permanently into the silver lining. Lena's stomach churned. "What is this place?" one of the officers whispered. Before anyone could answer, Lena noticed something else carved into the stone floor around the pedestal. Symbols. The same spiraling patterns from the carved door upstairs. But here, they formed a large circular design, stretching nearly 12 feet wide. At the far end of the chamber stood another door. Not wood, not stone, something else. It was tall and slightly curved, its surface black and glossy like obsidian. The carvings covering it seemed to twist subtly when viewed from different angles, almost as if they were alive. And it pulsed. Faintly. Lena blinked hard. The surface shimmered again, barely perceptible, like slow ripples across water. "Tell me you see that," Ruiz said under his breath. "I see it," she replied. Lena stepped closer to the pedestal. The air around it felt colder, sharper against her skin. Her heartbeat thudded loudly in her ears. She reached into her pocket and removed Sarah Patterson's locket. The moment it cleared her coat, the chamber shifted. A low vibration hummed through the floor. The glass containers lining the shelves rattled faintly, their contents clinking softly like distant wind chimes. "Lena," Ruiz warned. But she couldn't stop. Her eyes were locked on the obsidian door across the chamber. The pulsing had grown stronger, more deliberate, like a heartbeat responding to hers. She glanced down at the pedestal again and noticed a small inscription etched into its base. She read it aloud, her voice barely above a whisper. "Each keeper binds the threshold with memory and blood. Without the keeper, the door opens." Ruiz stepped closer. "This is ritualistic containment." Hart was right. Lena swallowed. Containment of what? No one answered. Because at that moment, the obsidian door exhaled. A long, hollow sound escaped from its seams. Not quite wind, not quite breath, but something deeply wrong. One of the glass containers shattered on a shelf behind them. Then another. And another. Lena spun around as fragments rained onto the stone floor. Several of the sealed objects rolled free from broken glass, scattering across the chamber. Among them, she spotted dozens of lockets identical to hers, each engraved differently, each carrying different initials, different dates. "Those are previous keepers," Ruiz said, horror creeping into his voice. Lena's mind raced. "Sarah Patterson was one," she said. "And before her someone else," Ruiz added. Lena's throat tightened. "And now," she whispered. Her gaze dropped slowly to her own hands. The locket trembled slightly between her fingers. Suddenly, Officer Malik gasped sharply behind them. They turned. Malik stood frozen again, staring directly at the obsidian door. His pupils had dilated so wide that his irises were barely visible. "Malik?" Lena said carefully. His lips moved. At first, no sound came out. Then, "It's calling," he murmured. Ruiz grabbed his shoulder. "Hey, snap out of it." Malik's body jerked violently. He shoved Ruiz aside with unnatural strength and staggered toward the door. "Stop him!" Lena shouted. Two officers lunged forward, grabbing Malik's arms. He thrashed wildly, screaming now, not in pain, but in desperation. "It wants to open," he yelled. "It needs the keeper." The chamber lights flickered as the obsidian surface began to ripple faster, like liquid being struck from within. Hairline cracks of faint crimson light began spreading across the door. Lena's breath hitched. "What do we do?" Ruiz demanded. Her mind flashed back to the inscription. "Each keeper binds the threshold with memory and blood." Her stomach dropped. "Malik isn't the one it wants," she said. Ruiz looked at her, realization dawning. "No," he said slowly. "It wants you." The door pulsed violently. The crimson cracks widened, leaking thin streams of red light that spilled across the chamber floor like veins spreading outward. The air grew heavy. The temperature dropped rapidly, their breath fogging in thick white clouds. And then, from the surface of the door, a shape pressed outward from the inside. Humanoid. Distorted. Its outlines stretched unnaturally long, fingers splayed against the glossy surface as if testing the barrier. The officers stumbled backward in horror. Malik collapsed unconscious. Ruiz grabbed Lena's arm. "Tell me you have a plan." She stared at the pedestal, then at the locket in her hand. Fear clawed through her chest. "I think," she said slowly, "I know what Sarah tried to do." And, Lena swallowed hard. "I think she failed." The figure inside the door pushed harder. The crimson fractures spiderwebbed across the surface. Stone cracked beneath their feet. Ruiz tightened his grip on her arm. "Lena, if you know how to stop this, you do it now." Her hands trembled as she stepped toward the pedestal. The chamber vibrated violently, dust raining from the ceiling. Glass shattered across every shelf. The obsidian door groaned, the sound deep and ancient, like something waking after centuries of sleep. Lena placed the locket slowly onto the pedestal. For a split second, everything went silent. Then the chamber screamed. The symbols carved into the floor ignited with crimson light, racing outward in spiraling patterns. The door convulsed violently as the humanoid shape inside clawed frantically at the surface. Lena gasped as sharp pain sliced across her palm. She looked down. The silver edges of the locket had cut through her glove and into her skin. Blood dripped onto the pedestal. The symbols flared brighter. The door howled, a sound so inhuman it made every officer drop to their knees, covering their ears. The shape inside thrashed wildly as the crimson cracks began sealing shut, one by one. The chamber's violent shaking slowed. The temperature rose. The pulsing faded. Finally, silence returned. Lena collapsed forward, catching herself on the pedestal, gasping for breath. Her palm burned, blood pooling beneath her hand. Behind her, Ruiz helped the other officers back to their feet. They stared at the door. It stood still again. Dark. Sealed. But as Lena lifted her shaking hand from the pedestal, she noticed something new carved into the silver surface of the locket. Fresh, as if etched by invisible hands. She wiped the blood away and read the new inscription. Her heart sank. Keeper accepted. Lena couldn't stop staring at the words carved into the locket. Keeper accepted. The silver surface felt colder now, heavier in her blood-stained palm. The chamber remained silent, but the silence wasn't comforting. It felt watchful, like the room itself had acknowledged her presence. Ruiz stepped beside her, his voice low. "Tell me that doesn't mean what I think it means." Lena swallowed. Her throat felt dry and tight. "I don't think we get to decide what it means," she said quietly. Behind them, officers began securing the chamber, photographing the shelves, tagging shattered containers, and radioing for forensic teams. Malik had regained consciousness but remained shaken, unable to explain what he had experienced. But Lena barely noticed any of it. Her focus remained locked on the obsidian door. It no longer pulsed. It no longer breathed. Yet she felt something inside it. Not movement. Not sound. Awareness. A history written in blood. Hours later, the team had sealed the underground chamber and escorted Lena and Ruiz back to the surface. Emergency floodlights bathed the abandoned house in harsh white light as investigators moved in and out like ants around a disturbed nest. The night sky had begun to lighten with early dawn, but Lena felt no relief from the coming daylight. Inside a temporary command tent, she sat at a folding table, reviewing the items recovered from the chamber. The lockets were being cataloged one by one. Each contained names, dates, and small, folded slips of paper hidden behind their frames. Ruiz placed a stack of transcribed notes in front of her. "You need to see this," he said. Lena flipped open the first report. Each slip of paper had contained handwritten entries, confessions, observations, final messages from previous keepers. Some entries were decades old. Others dated back over a century. The message patterns were disturbingly consistent. "The door grows restless every 10 years. It learns our fears. The ritual binds it, but only temporarily. The keeper must remain vigilant." Lena turned another page, her hands shaking slightly. The final entry from Sarah Patterson sat at the bottom of the stack. The handwriting was hurried, jagged with panic. "I delayed the ritual. I thought ignoring it would weaken the pull. I was wrong. The door grows stronger with neglect. If you are reading this, you are next. Don't trust the voices. They will mimic those you love. They will promise safety. They lie." Lena closed her eyes. Ruiz sat across from her, watching carefully. "So Sarah didn't die randomly," he said quietly. "No," Lena replied. "She tried to stop it, and failed. The mark appears." Later that morning, after forensic teams cleared the scene, Lena returned to her apartment. She hadn't slept. She hadn't eaten. Her mind replayed the chamber over and over. The image of the humanoid silhouette clawing at the door burned into her thoughts. She dropped her coat onto a chair and walked into the bathroom. Cold water splashed across her face, grounding her slightly. As she reached for a towel, she noticed something in the mirror. Her palm. The cut from the locket had sealed overnight, but the skin hadn't healed normally. A thin, faint spiral mark had formed where the blood had fallen. Lena stared at it, her stomach tightening. The mark pulsed softly, barely noticeable, but undeniably present. She clenched her fist. The pulsing stopped. She opened her hand. It resumed. Her breath quickened. The keeper's watch begins. Over the next week, life tried to return to normal. But normal no longer existed for Lena. The department officially labeled the house and underground chamber as an active crime scene tied to a secret historical cult known as the Threshold Keepers. Media coverage exploded, though much of the supernatural speculation was dismissed publicly as hysteria or exaggeration. Only a handful of officers, Lena, Ruiz, Hart, and a few trusted investigators, knew the full truth. Hart called an emergency meeting in his office late one evening. He stood beside a corkboard filled with photographs, historical documents, and sketches of symbols matching those in the chamber. "The Threshold Keepers have existed longer than we realized," Hart explained. "Their purpose wasn't to worship whatever is behind that door." He paused. "They were trying to contain it." Ruiz leaned forward. "You're telling us generations of people sacrificed themselves just to keep that thing locked?" Hart nodded grimly. "And now," Ruiz said, glancing at Lena, "she's the next in line." Silence filled the room. Lena folded her arms tightly across her chest. "What exactly does being the keeper involve?" she asked. Hart exhaled slowly. "Based on recovered journals, the keeper performs periodic rituals to reinforce the seal, monitors disturbances, and resists the psychological effects." "Psychological effects?" Ruiz repeated. Hart hesitated. The entity communicates, he said quietly. The first whisper. Lena didn't believe him. Not completely. Until 3 nights later. She was reviewing case files at home when she heard her phone vibrate across the table. She glanced down, expecting a message from Ruiz or Hart. The screen was blank. No notifications. The vibration continued anyway. Lena frowned and picked it up. The screen flickered once, then went dark. And from the speaker, a faint voice whispered her name. Lena! She dropped the phone instantly. It clattered across the floor, the screen returning to normal. Her heart hammered violently against her ribs. She stared at the phone for several seconds before slowly picking it up again. Nothing. No call history. No messages. But her palm began to pulse again. Harder this time. A visit to the chamber. The disturbances escalated over the following days. Strange dreams. Flickering lights. Shadows that seemed to move independently from their sources. Finally, Lena returned to the abandoned house with Ruiz and Hart. The chamber remained sealed, guarded around the clock. As Lena descended the spiral staircase, the pulsing in her palm intensified with every step. By the time she reached the chamber floor, the sensation had grown almost painful. The obsidian door stood motionless, but the carvings shimmered faintly as she approached. Hart opened a leather-bound journal recovered from one of the glass containers. This belonged to a keeper from 1912, he said. Lena barely heard him. Her eyes remained locked on the door. The journals suggest the entity grows more active when a new keeper resists their role, Hart continued. Ruiz glanced between them. So ignoring it makes things worse. Hart nodded. Lena stepped closer to the pedestal. The symbols carved into the floor glowed faintly beneath her boots. Then we don't ignore it, she said. Ruiz's voice sharpened. Lena, you don't seriously mean. If the ritual keeps it contained, I need to understand it, she interrupted. Hart handed her the journal. Inside, detailed instructions filled the yellowed pages, diagrams, symbols, and ritual sequences performed every decade. At the bottom of the final page was a chilling note. The keeper must never perform the ritual alone. The entity will attempt to isolate you. Isolation weakens the seal. Lena looked up slowly. We're not doing this alone, she said firmly. Ruiz nodded without hesitation. Good, he replied, because I'm not letting you face that thing by yourself. The shadow watches. As they turned to leave the chamber, Lena hesitated and glanced back at the obsidian door one last time. For a moment, she thought she saw movement beneath the glossy surface. A ripple. Then, a faint outline pressing outward from inside. It vanished instantly. But Lena knew she hadn't imagined it. Her palm throbbed violently again, the spiral mark glowing faintly beneath her skin. A voice echoed faintly in the back of her mind. Not spoken. Not heard. Felt. You cannot hold the threshold forever. Lena clenched her fist tightly, forcing the mark to dim. She turned and followed Ruiz and Hart up the staircase, determination hardening inside her chest. Because she understood something now. This wasn't just a curse passed down through generations. It was a war fought silently across time, and she had just been drafted into its front line. The rain began just after midnight. Heavy, relentless drops pounded against the roof of the abandoned Patterson house, turning the surrounding forest into a black ocean of swaying branches and whispering leaves. Thunder rolled low across the sky, echoing like distant artillery. Lena stood at the top of the staircase leading down to the hidden chamber, gripping the leather journal Hart had given her. The pages felt heavier tonight, as if they carried more than just instructions, as if they carried warnings. Behind her, Ruiz adjusted the floodlight rig they had installed throughout the house, ensuring the staircase remained illuminated. Hart checked the equipment bags laid out across the living room floor, candles, chalk, silver bowls, salt containers, and recording devices. The ritual tools. None of them liked calling it that, but none of them denied what it was either. You don't have to do this tonight, Ruiz said quietly. Lena didn't turn around. Yes, she replied, her voice steady but hollow. I do. Hart joined them at the stairwell, holding another recovered journal. His face looked older than usual, the weight of history pressing into every line across his forehead. The journals are consistent, he said. Every keeper performed reinforcement rituals during periods of heightened activity. The disturbances you've been experiencing, he hesitated. They usually precede breaches. Lena exhaled slowly. Then we're already late, she said. The gathering. By 1:15 a.m., they stood inside the chamber. The obsidian door shimmered faintly beneath the floodlights. The spiral carvings across the floor seemed darker tonight, the grooves catching the light in unsettling patterns that shifted when viewed from different angles. Lena knelt beside the pedestal while Hart arranged candles along the outer ring of the carved symbols. Ruiz poured thin lines of salt between each spiral channel, following diagrams from the journal with careful precision. Thunder rattled the chamber ceiling. Water dripped faintly from cracks in the stone above, each drop echoing unnaturally loud in the circular space. You sure this isn't just psychological conditioning? Ruiz asked quietly, while placing the final salt line. Hart shook his head. The journals document physical breaches, disappearances, structural damage to the chamber itself. He paused. Whatever is behind that door interacts with reality. Ruiz muttered under his breath. Great. That's comforting. The ritual begins. Lena opened the journal to the ritual sequence. The instructions were detailed but fragmented, written by different keepers across decades. Some handwriting was elegant and calm. Others were frantic and jagged. She swallowed hard and began reading aloud. Light the outer circle to establish the boundary. Hart struck a match, lighting the candles one by one. As each flame ignited, the chamber's shadows deepened, dancing violently across the walls. Place the keeper's blood upon the pedestal, Lena continued. Her chest tightened. Ruiz stepped forward. You don't have to. Yes, she said firmly. She removed her glove and pressed a small ceremonial blade, found among the ritual tools, against her palm. The blade sliced cleanly across the spiral mark, reopening the wound instantly. Pain shot up her arm. Crimson droplets fell onto the pedestal, soaking into the stone surface. The spiral carvings across the floor flickered faintly. The obsidian door responded immediately. It pulsed once, deep, heavy, like the first beat of a monstrous heart. Ruiz cursed under his breath. Continue, Hart urged quietly. Lena's voice trembled slightly as she read the next line. Recite the binding words. She hesitated, staring at the ancient script written in looping, unfamiliar symbols. Hart had translated it earlier, but reading it aloud felt like swallowing glass. She began anyway. By memory given, by blood returned, the threshold remains sealed. The chamber temperature dropped instantly. Their breath fogged the air. The candle flames bent inward toward the pedestal, stretching unnaturally long as if drawn by invisible gravity. The obsidian surface rippled slowly. And then, a voice answered. The mimic. Lena. Her body stiffened. The voice came from the door. Soft. Familiar. Her stomach dropped as she recognized it instantly. Her mother's voice. Ruiz stepped closer to her. Ignore it. But the voice continued. Lena, it's cold in here. I need you. Her hands trembled violently, the journal slipping slightly between her fingers. Memories surged through her mind. Hospital rooms, last conversations, the hollow grief she had buried beneath years of work and discipline. Don't listen, Hart warned. The door's surface bulged outward slightly, forming the faint outline of a human silhouette pressing against it from the inside. Please, open it, the voice whispered. Lena's knees nearly buckled. Tears blurred her vision as she forced her eyes back onto the journal. Repeat the binding words, she whispered hoarsely. Ruiz placed a steadying hand on her shoulder. You're not alone, he said. Lena swallowed hard and repeated the incantation louder. By memory given, by blood returned, the threshold remains sealed. The silhouette inside the door twisted violently. The voice shifted abruptly, becoming distorted, layered with multiple tones overlapping each other. You cannot hold forever, Keeper, it hissed. The breach attempt. The spiral symbols across the floor ignited suddenly, glowing bright crimson. The salt lines began vibrating violently, scattering grains across the stone floor. Hairline fractures appeared across the obsidian surface, leaking faint red light that spread across the chamber like bleeding veins. Ruiz grabbed Lena's arm. What's next? She flipped through the journal rapidly, her blood dripping onto the pages. The final anchor, she said, reading quickly. Her stomach twisted. The instructions described placing the keeper's locket onto the pedestal and allowing the entity to imprint upon it. What does that mean? Ruiz demanded. I think, Lena whispered, her voice shaking. "It means it marks me permanently." Ruiz's jaw tightened. "There has to be another way." Hart shook his head grimly. "The journals suggest the anchor ritual is what binds each keeper to the threshold." The cracks across the door widened violently. The silhouette inside slammed against the surface repeatedly, each impact shaking the chamber. Stones fell from the ceiling. Candles extinguished one by one. The salt circle shattered. "Do it now!" Hart shouted. "The anchor." Lena removed the silver locket from her coat pocket. The metal burned against her skin, glowing faintly as if reacting to the chaos around them. She placed it onto the pedestal. Instantly, the obsidian door screamed. Not a sound. A vibration that rattled their bones and filled their skulls with unbearable pressure. The spiral mark on Lena's palm erupted in searing pain, spreading burning veins up her wrist and forearm. The silhouette inside the door pressed outward violently, its distorted face becoming momentarily visible beneath the surface, featureless, stretched, and impossibly wide. Ruiz shouted her name, but she couldn't hear him anymore. The chamber filled with blinding crimson light as symbols ignited across the floor and walls simultaneously. The locket snapped open on its own. Dark liquid, not blood, not shadow, something in between, poured into it from the pedestal's stone grooves. The door convulsed violently. The silhouette screamed silently as the cracks across the surface sealed shut again, sealing the figure back into darkness. The crimson light faded slowly. The chamber fell still. The binding completes. Lena collapsed forward, gasping for breath, her arm throbbing with unbearable heat. Ruiz and Hart rushed to her side, helping her sit upright. Lena, look at me," Ruiz said urgently. She blinked slowly, her vision swimming. The obsidian door stood silent again. Still. Sealed. Hart picked up the locket carefully and handed it back to her. She stared at it, dread pooling in her chest. Inside the silver frame, new engravings had formed. Not initials. Not dates. Symbols. Complex spirals interwoven with shapes that seemed to shift when she stared too long. And beneath them, one line of text had appeared. Her voice barely rose above a whisper as she read it aloud. "The keeper is bound until the 10th ritual." Ruiz frowned. "What does that mean?" Hart's face paled. "It means," he said quietly, "this was only the first reinforcement." Lena's stomach dropped. "How often are they required?" Ruiz asked. Hart hesitated. "According to the journals." He swallowed hard. "Every 10 years. A future written in stone." They climbed the staircase in silence. The storm outside had faded, leaving the forest dripping with rain and moonlight filtering through broken clouds. Lena stepped onto the porch, breathing deeply as cold night air filled her lungs. Her palm still pulsed faintly. The spiral mark had darkened, spreading further across her wrist like a living tattoo. Ruiz stood beside her, watching the horizon slowly lighten with approaching dawn. "You okay?" he asked quietly. Lena stared out toward the forest. "No," she admitted honestly. She tightened her grip on the locket. "But I will be." Behind them, deep beneath the house, the obsidian door remained sealed. Silent. Waiting. The nightmares began 3 nights after the ritual. They didn't arrive all at once. They crept in slowly, like fog slipping under a locked door. At first, Lena dreamed of the chamber, the spiral symbols glowing faintly beneath her feet, the obsidian door standing silent across the room. She would stand there alone, unable to move, watching the carvings twist and shift like living veins beneath the surface. Then the dreams changed. In the next one, the door was open. Not shattered, not broken, simply open. And behind it, there was no darkness. There was light, blinding, red-gold light pouring outward like a sunrise bleeding into the chamber. And within that light, figures moved, tall, distorted shapes stretching far beyond human proportions. Each time, just before she could see them clearly, she would wake up gasping, her palm burning as the spiral mark pulsed violently beneath her skin. The disturbances escalate. By the end of the week, Mistwood began reporting strange incidents. The first call came from a construction site on the edge of town. Workers claimed the ground had split open beneath newly poured concrete, revealing a spiral pattern carved into the earth itself. The second came from a hospital nurse who reported hearing voices whispering patient names through the ventilation system. The third was far worse. A teenage boy vanished from his bedroom without a trace. His window remained locked from the inside. The only thing left behind was a spiral symbol drawn across his bedroom wall using what forensic teams later confirmed was his own blood. Ruiz slammed the case file shut inside the precinct briefing room. "This isn't random escalation," he said. "This is organized. Intentional." Hart nodded grimly. The journals mention periods called threshold weakening. It happens when the entity attempts to expand its influence beyond the chamber. Lena sat silently at the end of the table, her fingers wrapped tightly around the silver locket. The spiral mark on her wrist had darkened further, the lines now extending halfway up her forearm. "You're connected to it," Ruiz said carefully. Lena nodded once. "I can feel it," she admitted. "It's testing the barrier." Hart looked up sharply. "Testing how?" Lena swallowed. "Through fear. Through dreams. Through influence." Silence filled the room. Then she added quietly, "And it's getting stronger." The Keeper's Archive. That night, Lena returned to the Patterson house alone. Ruiz had insisted on coming, but she had refused. Not out of pride, out of instinct. The journals had warned repeatedly that the entity thrived on emotional connections. The more people tied to the Keeper, the easier it could manipulate them. She descended the spiral staircase slowly, her flashlight beam slicing through the darkness. The chamber remained exactly as they had left it, silent, still, but the air felt heavier tonight, pressing against her chest with suffocating weight. She walked along the shelves, studying the recovered journals more closely. For the first time, she noticed something she had missed before. Some lockets had small etchings along their outer rims. Numbers. She grabbed one from the early 1800s. A tiny Roman numeral had been scratched into the silver. 3. Her heart skipped. She grabbed another. 6. Another. 9. Her stomach dropped. She counted backward, matching each numbered locket with journal entries. Each number represented a completed ritual cycle. Each keeper had survived only so many rituals. None had reached 10. The truth revealed. Lena flipped through the final journal recovered from the chamber, the one belonging to Sarah Patterson. Her eyes landed on a page she hadn't noticed before, hidden behind a folded photograph of Sarah as a child. The handwriting was calmer than Sarah's last frantic entry. More resigned. Lena read it aloud, her voice echoing across the chamber. "No keeper survives the 10th ritual." Her pulse hammered violently. She continued reading. "The 10th ritual is not reinforcement. It is release." The words felt like ice sliding down her spine. The keeper is not chosen to guard the threshold forever. The keeper is raised to become the final key. Lena staggered backward, nearly dropping the journal. "No," she whispered. The obsidian door pulsed once. Slow, deliberate, as if responding to her realization. The voice returns. "Now you understand." The whisper slithered through the chamber, echoing from every wall simultaneously. Lena spun toward the door. The surface shimmered violently as the silhouette pressed outward again, clearer than ever before. Its elongated limbs stretched unnaturally across the glossy barrier, fingers splayed wide. "You are not my jailer, Keeper," the layered voice hissed. "You are my gate." Lena's heart pounded as she stepped backward. "You're lying," she said, though her voice trembled. The entity's distorted outline tilted its head slightly. "Read their endings," it whispered. Her mind flashed through the journals, each keeper's final entry abruptly stopping after the 9th ritual. Not one documented the 10th. Not one recorded survival beyond it. The partial breach. Without warning, the spiral symbols across the floor ignited violently, flaring bright crimson. The chamber trembled as deep cracks formed along the obsidian surface, leaking thin beams of red light that spread across the room like fractured veins. Lena dropped the journal and stumbled toward the pedestal instinctively, grabbing her locket. The spiral mark across her arm burned like molten metal. The silhouette inside the door slammed forward violently. The obsidian surface splintered. A long, clawed hand forced halfway through the fracture, its skin translucent and shifting like smoke trapped beneath glass. The chamber exploded with sound, a low, deafening roar that shook the walls and sent glass containers crashing from the shelves. Lena screamed, clutching her locket as memories flooded her mind, not hers. Visions of previous keepers, standing in this chamber, performing rituals, dying, becoming part of the seal. Ruiz's voice crackled suddenly through her radio. "Lena, what's happening?" She gasped for breath. "It's breaching. The door is breaking." The emergency binding. She flipped open the journal desperately, searching through ritual sequences until she found an emergency containment procedure scribbled across the final pages by multiple keepers in different handwriting. If the threshold fractures prematurely, the keeper must offer immediate blood binding. Her hands trembled violently. She raised the ceremonial blade again, slicing deeper across her forearm this time. Blood streamed down her arm, dripping onto the pedestal in heavy crimson drops. The chamber responded instantly. The spiral carvings ignited blinding white instead of crimson. The clawed hand recoiled violently as the obsidian surface began sealing itself again, layer by layer. The silhouette inside shrieked in rage, its voice splitting into dozens of overlapping tones. "You cannot hold me beyond the 10th. Lena collapsed to her knees, pressing her bleeding arm against the pedestal as the chamber vibrated violently around her. "Then I'll rewrite the ending," she gasped. The final fracture sealed shut. The chamber fell silent again. The final warning. Lena lay on the chamber floor, barely conscious, as Ruiz and Hart burst through the hidden passage minutes later. Ruiz rushed to her side, wrapping her arm tightly with gauze while Hart examined the pedestal and door. "She stopped a full breach," Hart said in stunned disbelief. Ruiz helped Lena sit upright. "What happened?" he demanded. She stared weakly at the obsidian door. "I found the truth," she whispered. Hart looked at her carefully. "And?" Lena's voice cracked. "The 10th ritual isn't containment." Ruiz froze. "It's a sacrifice." The chamber remained silent. But deep within the obsidian surface, a faint pulse echoed. Slow, patient, waiting. The hospital room smelled like antiseptic and exhaustion. Rain tapped softly against the window, tracing slow trails down the glass as dawn crept across mistwood. Machines hummed beside Lena's bed, monitoring her heart rate and blood pressure, their steady rhythm the only sign of calm after the chaos beneath the Patterson house. Lena stared at the ceiling, her mind replaying the chamber's last moments over and over. The 10th ritual is release. The words echoed through her thoughts like a countdown she could no longer silence. Ruiz sat in the chair beside her bed, arms folded, eyes shadowed with fatigue. He hadn't left since the emergency binding ritual. Hart stood near the window, flipping through translated journal pages, his expression hollow. Finally, Ruiz broke the silence. "You're not dying for this thing," he said bluntly. Lena turned her head slightly toward him. "I might not get a choice," she replied quietly. Ruiz leaned forward, anger tightening his voice. "Every keeper before you followed the same rules written by people who were terrified and desperate. That doesn't mean they were right." Hart lowered the journal slowly. "History suggests they weren't wrong either," he said carefully. Ruiz shot him a glare. Hart sighed heavily. "The journals confirm the 10th ritual ends with the keeper becoming part of the seal. It strengthens the threshold permanently, but it destroys the keeper physically and psychologically." Silence returned. Then Lena spoke. What if that wasn't their only option? The forgotten entry. 2 days later, Lena returned to the chamber with Ruiz and Hart. Her arm was heavily bandaged, but the spiral mark had spread across her entire forearm now, faint lines pulsing beneath her skin like living ink. They worked through every recovered journal again, cross-referencing timelines, translations, and fragmented entries. For hours, nothing new appeared, until Hart noticed a hidden seam inside the oldest journal, one belonging to the first recorded keeper in 1782. Inside the seam was a folded parchment far more fragile than the others. The handwriting was different, more deliberate, almost hopeful. Lena read it aloud. "The threshold is not meant to imprison. It is meant to balance. The entity beyond the door is not pure evil, but it is not meant for our world. The keepers misunderstood one truth. Sacrifice strengthens the barrier, but understanding reshapes it." Ruiz leaned closer. "What does that mean?" Lena continued reading. "If a keeper survives long enough to confront the entity directly during the 10th opening, the threshold may be rewritten. But none have tried. Fear guided every keeper before." Hart stared at the parchment, stunned. "They always reinforce the prison," he said quietly. "Instead of changing it," Lena finished. "Preparing for the 10th opening, The journals confirmed one terrifying detail. The 10th ritual could not be prevented. Once a keeper was bound, the threshold would eventually force the final opening. The moment when the barrier weakened enough for the keeper to complete the final ritual or be consumed by it. And Lena's mark was accelerating. The spiral had already reached her shoulder. Hart estimated she had days, maybe weeks, before the 10th opening began naturally. So they prepared. Instead of ritual containment tools, they gathered historical texts, linguistic records, and ancient symbol translations recovered from the chamber. If Lena was going to confront the entity, she needed to understand its language, its purpose, its nature. Ruiz focused on structural analysis of the chamber, mapping energy surges recorded during previous rituals. He installed monitoring devices throughout the underground structure, hoping to track the exact moment the threshold began weakening. Sleep became rare. Time blurred. Every second felt like borrowed breath. The final opening begins. It started on a windless night. No storm. No warning. Lena woke suddenly in her apartment, gasping as the spiral mark erupted in blinding pain across her entire arm and chest. The locket around her neck burned against her skin, glowing faint crimson. Her phone buzzed instantly. Ruiz. It's starting, he said the moment she answered. Sensors are spiking. The chamber is destabilizing. She grabbed her coat without responding and rushed out the door. The threshold shatters. By the time Lena reached the Patterson house, the air itself felt unstable. The ground trembled faintly beneath her boots as she descended the hidden staircase with Ruiz and Hart close behind. The chamber glowed deep crimson. The spiral carvings across the floor pulsed violently, their light flickering like a dying heartbeat. And the obsidian door was cracking. Thick fractures split across its surface, leaking blinding red-gold light that flooded the chamber in violent waves. The silhouette inside no longer pressed outward. It stood fully formed behind the surface. Waiting. Lena stepped forward slowly, clutching the parchment from the first keeper. This is where they sacrificed themselves, Hart whispered. Lena nodded. But I'm not them. The keeper steps forward. As the final fracture split the obsidian surface completely, the chamber fell silent. The door dissolved into drifting shards of black glass that evaporated before touching the ground. The light behind it dimmed slightly, revealing a vast, shifting void filled with swirling golden mist and distant, towering silhouettes moving slowly beyond perception. One figure stepped forward. It was taller than any human, its form constantly shifting between solid and vapor. Its face remained undefined, features forming and dissolving endlessly as it observed Lena. You stand where 10 lifetimes have ended, it said, its voice layered with countless tones. Lena forced herself to step closer. They died because they didn't understand you, she said. The entity tilted its head. And you believe you do? Lena raised the parchment. You were never meant to cross into this world, she said steadily. And we were never meant to imprison you completely. The threshold is supposed to be a balance. The entity's form rippled slowly. Balance requires sacrifice, it replied. Not destruction, Lena countered. The rewrite. The chamber trembled violently as the threshold energy surged around them. The spiral symbols ignited across the floor, walls, and ceiling simultaneously. Lena removed the locket from her neck and stepped into the light beyond the broken doorway. Ruiz shouted behind her, but she didn't stop. Pain erupted through her body as the spiral mark burned across her skin, spreading to her back, her neck, her face. The energy pulled at her consciousness, threatening to dissolve her entirely. But she held the parchment high, reciting the ancient translation. By memory given, by blood returned, the threshold becomes a bridge, not a prison. The entity's form flickered violently. You offer coexistence, it said. I offer boundaries, Lena replied. The light exploded around them, consuming the chamber in blinding brilliance. Ruiz and Hart shielded their eyes as the floor cracked beneath their feet. Lena felt her body begin dissolving into the light, her memories flashing across her mind like fragments breaking apart. Her childhood, her mother, every investigation, every victim she had fought for. Take the connection, she gasped. Not the keeper. The entity extended a shifting limb toward her, touching the spiral mark across her chest. The burning stopped instantly. The light collapsed inward. The new threshold. When Ruiz opened his eyes, the chamber had changed completely. The obsidian door was gone. In its place stood a translucent barrier of shimmering light, faint spiral patterns flowing across its surface like moving constellations. Lena lay unconscious beside the pedestal. Ruiz rushed to her side. "Lena!" Her eyes fluttered open slowly. The spiral mark across her skin had faded, leaving only a faint silver outline across her palm. Hart stared at the new barrier in stunned silence. "It's stabilized," he whispered. Aftermath. Months later, Mistwood began to heal from centuries of hidden fear. The Patterson house was sealed permanently and converted into a historical research site. The chamber remained guarded, though the shimmering threshold no longer pulsed violently. It simply existed, balanced. Lena returned to active duty, though she carried the silver locket everywhere she went. The faint spiral mark on her palm remained as a reminder, not of burden, but of responsibility. One evening, she stood on Mistwood Bridge as sunset painted the river gold. Ruiz leaned beside her. "So is it over?" he asked. Lena looked toward the distant forest. "No," she said softly, "but it's different now." She closed her hand around the locket. "And this time we're not alone." Far beneath the town, the threshold shimmered quietly. Watching. Waiting. Balanced. Story 2. It was 6:42 p.m. when the first call came in. The dispatcher's voice was calm, almost robotic, as she listened to the woman on the line. But Officer Daniel Mercer, sitting in his patrol car a few blocks away, could hear the tremor in the caller's voice as clearly as if she were sitting beside him. "My daughter, she's gone. I don't know where she went," the woman stammered. Her words came in broken fragments, punctuated by the occasional sob. She was just standing by the bridge, and then she wasn't there." Mercer gripped the steering wheel tightly. Hollow Creek Bridge wasn't a busy thoroughfare. In fact, it barely qualified as a crossing over the slow-moving creek below. Streetlights flickered along its span, casting long shadows over the asphalt. Every local child knew not to linger near the water after dark. By the time Mercer arrived, the area had already drawn a small crowd. Parents stood nervously on the edges of the bridge, their faces pale, while a few teenagers whispered nervously among themselves, pointing toward the far side of the creek where the forest began. The creek below glimmered faintly in the failing light, its surface smooth, as though nothing had disturbed it at all. He approached the mother, whose name he later learned was Allison Parker. Her hands trembled as she clutched a small, pink backpack, the straps twisted in her fingers. "She's only 12, Allison said, her voice cracking. "I left her there for a minute, just to tie her shoes. I didn't even look away for more than a moment. And then she was gone." Mercer nodded, trying to calm her. "Did anyone see anyone suspicious? Any cars? Anyone near the bridge?" Allison shook her head violently. No one. It's like she just vanished." The girl's disappearance wasn't the first oddity in Hollow Creek, but something about this one set Mercer's instincts on edge. The town had always been quiet, sleepy even, but in recent months, strange occurrences had been creeping into the shadows. Missing pets, vandalism with strange symbols, and rumors of a man who watched children from the woods. But no one ever reported anything concrete, until now. Mercer crouched by the edge of the bridge, examining the rough concrete guardrail. He noticed faint scratches, too high for a child, but too random to be natural wear. There were scuff marks along the asphalt leading to the side of the bridge where the forest began. And something else, tiny, nearly imperceptible footprints in the soft soil near the creek bank. Not human. Too small, too narrow, elongated. He straightened and radioed dispatch. "Unit 12 here. We need a full search. Dogs. Canine units. Entire forest sector, south of the creek." The dispatcher's voice hesitated. "We'll get them out immediately. You want the state police involved?" "Yes. And get a helicopter. Now," Mercer replied, already moving toward the path that led into the forest. "There's something wrong here." The forest whispers. The Hollow Creek forest wasn't particularly large, but the trees were dense, their canopies forming almost complete darkness even in early evening. Mercer followed the faint path where the scuff marks led, his flashlight cutting arcs through the misty underbrush. He felt eyes on him, an eerie sensation he couldn't shake. A branch snapped behind him. Mercer swung the flashlight, but there was nothing. The forest was silent, save for the creek's faint trickle and the occasional call of a distant owl. Then he found it, a small scarf, pink, snagged on a branch several feet above the ground. Mercer's heart sank. This wasn't an accident. The scarf had been torn deliberately. Whoever had taken Allison's daughter knew exactly what they were doing. He called it in immediately. Found item, pink scarf, snagged on branch. Possible suspect path continues north toward the old Hollow Creek mill. The mill had been abandoned for decades, a crumbling relic of the town's industrial past. Locals rarely went near it, warning of collapsing floors and dangerous chemicals left behind. But Mercer knew instinctively that this was where the trail led. The bridge witness. Before heading toward the mill, Mercer stopped to speak to a boy standing near the bridge. The boy couldn't have been more than 14. His name was Ethan, and he had been riding his bike along the creek when the girl vanished. "I saw something," Ethan said, voice low and trembling. It wasn't a person. I don't know. It was like the air moved wrong, like it swallowed her. Then the shadows, they shifted." Mercer frowned. "Shadows?" The boy nodded vigorously. "Yes. The trees, they moved, but not like wind. Like alive. And then she was gone. Just gone." Mercer suppressed a shiver. Hollow Creek had always been prone to exaggeration, but the boy's eyes were wide, genuine. Something unnatural had happened here. "Did anyone else see anything?" Mercer asked. The boy shook his head. "No, but you should check the old mill. That's where it came from before." Mercer didn't know what the boy meant, but he noted it carefully. Everything about this case felt wrong, and he knew instinctively it would consume the town, and him, if he didn't find the girl soon. The old Hollow Creek mill. By the time Mercer reached the mill, the sun had disappeared entirely behind thick clouds, leaving only the flashlight beams to illuminate the crumbling structure. Rusted machinery leaned precariously against walls, cobwebs hung like drapes, and the air smelled faintly of decay and mildew. He moved carefully, listening for any sound. Nothing. Then he saw it, a door half hidden beneath a fallen beam. Marks on the ground suggested recent movement. Not animal movement. Human. Or something else entirely. Mercer radioed in. "Possible suspect hideout or victim location. Need backup at the mill immediately. All units proceed with caution." As he stepped closer, his flashlight beam caught a strange symbol scrawled on the wall in what looked like dried mud. A spiral inside a circle, jagged lines cutting outward. Mercer froze. He had seen something like this before, in missing person reports that had been dismissed as prank graffiti. A chill ran down his spine. This was not a random act. This was deliberate. And as he approached the doorway, he could hear it, a faint whisper, almost carried by the wind. "Help me." Mercer's heart pounded as he entered the darkness. A terrifying discovery. Inside the mill, the air was thick and stagnant. Mercer moved carefully, the beam of his flashlight shaking slightly. Then he found her. The girl was sitting in a corner, knees drawn to her chest, rocking back and forth. Her eyes were wide, unblinking, staring at the wall. On the wall, dozens of symbols were etched in the dust. Spirals, circles, jagged lines, all forming patterns Mercer didn't understand. "Hey, it's okay," Mercer said gently, kneeling beside her. "You're safe now." The girl didn't respond. Then she whispered, barely audible, "They're coming back." Mercer glanced around, his instincts screaming. The symbols were not just markings. They were warnings, instructions, messages. And outside, in the shadows of the mill, something moved. Not human, not animal, something else. The next morning, Hollow Creek woke under a gray, oppressive sky. The storm from the previous night had left puddles across the cracked asphalt, reflecting the skeletal trees lining the main street. Officer Daniel Mercer drove slowly past the Parker residence, keeping one eye on the house and another on the creeping mist that rose from the creek. Allison Parker, the girl's mother, sat on the front porch in a worn rocking chair, staring blankly at the forest beyond the bridge. She hadn't slept, hadn't eaten, and barely blinked. Every time Mercer drove by, she would look up at him, desperate eyes pleading for answers he didn't yet have. Mercer sighed, gripping the steering wheel. He knew the first 24 hours in missing person cases were critical. The longer the trail went cold, the slimmer the chance of a safe recovery. But this case was unlike any he had handled. Something about the way the girl had vanished, one moment tied to reality, the next gone entirely, set his instincts screaming. He parked his car at the station and joined Detective Claire Whitman in the briefing room. Whitman had arrived early, her hair tied back tightly, her glasses perched on the bridge of her nose. She was meticulous, precise, the kind of detective who noticed patterns before they existed. "Morning," Mercer said. He dropped a folder on the table. "We've got the girl back, but she's not speaking much." Claire flipped through the folder quickly, eyes narrowing. "And the symbols on the wall?" Mercer nodded. Spirals inside circles, jagged lines radiating outward. "Not random. She was writing them herself, or copying them. We don't know which. She says they're coming back." Claire leaned back in her chair, tapping her pen against her lips. "We've had disappearances here before. Kids vanish for hours, sometimes days. Usually they turn up, sometimes worse. But never with this." She gestured vaguely. "Symbols, patterns. Something new is happening." Mercer frowned. "You think this is connected?" Claire's eyes were distant. "I think someone, or something, is orchestrating it. And whoever it is, they've been doing this a long time." Digging into the past. The Hollow Creek Historical Society had been quiet for decades, housing old newspapers, town records, and photographs of the town's early days. Claire and Mercer made their way there mid-morning, hoping to find any documentation of past disappearances. The archivist, a gaunt man named Harold Finch, led them to the town's old crime logs, bound in thick leather covers. Dusty records chronicled Hollow Creek's missing children from the 1930s onward. Some cases were dismissed as runaways, others were marked unexplained. Claire flipped through a log dated 1947. "Listen to this." She read aloud. "October 12th. Young girl, age 11, vanished near the creek. Witnesses report seeing a shadow moving unnaturally among the trees. Symbols carved into the bridge's railing." Mercer's stomach sank. "Symbols again?" Claire nodded. "And not just random. Look at the sketches, they're spirals, circles, jagged lines. The same kind the girl drew in the mill." Mercer ran a hand through his hair. "So this has been going on for 70 years? Or longer," Claire replied. She pulled out a map of Hollow Creek from 1902, noting the locations of disappearances. "They're all near water. Bridges, creeks, mills, it's like a network." Mercer studied the map. Each marked disappearance clustered unnaturally close to the next, forming arcs that seemed deliberate, almost like a pattern. Claire's eyes lit up. "Exactly. And if you connect the dots," she traced the map with her finger. "Look, there's a spiral forming across the town. Hollow Creek isn't random. It's the center of something much bigger. The girl's behavior." Meanwhile, Allison Parker's daughter, Emily, had been quiet in the hospital. She refused food, barely slept, and rarely spoke more than a word or two. She spent hours staring at her hands or drawing spirals on paper with whatever pen she could find. Dr. Elaine Foster, the town psychologist, observed her carefully. "She's not in shock, at least not the typical kind," Foster told Mercer and Claire. "Her mind is fixated, obsessive. The drawings, the whispering, it's like she's trying to map something. She's aware of patterns adults can't see. Something she knows we don't." Mercer frowned. "Patterns of what?" Foster shook her head. "I don't know, but she seems certain someone, or something, is following her. She believes the symbols protect her, or guide her." Claire exchanged a glance with Mercer. "The patterns aren't just historical, they're predictive. Maybe the girl sees what the perpetrators plan next." Foster nodded. "Yes, if we can decode her drawings, we might predict the next target or the next location." Mercer grimaced. "Or the next danger. A breakthrough." Later that afternoon, Mercer returned to the Hollow Creek Bridge with the girl in tow. Emily clutched a small notebook, her fingers trembling, and scribbled furiously as they walked. Claire and Mercer followed her across the bridge, scanning the surroundings. She paused midway, pointing toward the creek. "There," she whispered. Beneath the bridge, the water ran deeper and darker than usual. Mud along the bank had impressions, elongated, narrow, unnatural footprints. Mercer crouched to examine them. "They're the same as last night," he said. "Same as the mill." Emily nodded solemnly. She handed the notebook to Claire. Pages were filled with spirals, circles, and intersecting lines, forming complex networks across the page. Small annotations marked with numbers appeared beside them. Claire traced the lines carefully. "These aren't random," she said. They match the historical locations of past disappearances. She's mapping them. And look, these numbers. Dates. She's predicting them. Mercer's stomach sank. You mean, there's a pattern to who's taken next? Claire nodded gravely. Exactly. And if we don't decode it, we won't just fail Emily, we'll fail anyone who's next. The investigation expands. By evening, the case had attracted attention beyond Hollow Creek. State police officers arrived, joined by K-9 units and forensic experts. Drones hovered above the creek, mapping the forest perimeter, while detectives interviewed parents, teenagers, and anyone who had been near the bridges or mills in recent weeks. Mercer, Claire, and Foster huddled over Emily's notebook in a temporary command tent. They laid old maps over the table, marking locations from the girl's notebook and historical records. Claire tapped her pen against the table. It's all here. Every disappearance, every symbol, every pattern, they're connected. Someone has been orchestrating this for decades. And Emily, she's the first to notice it early enough to survive. Mercer swallowed hard. Then we're running out of time. Whoever's behind this, they know she's noticing. They'll come back. Foster nodded. And the patterns show escalation. Spirals are getting tighter, more precise. Whoever, or whatever, is orchestrating this isn't sloppy. They're learning. They're adapting. Claire pointed at a series of numbers Emily had written, corresponding to dates of past disappearances. The next date, it's only 2 days from now. Mercer's fists clenched. Then we need to act fast. Patrol every bridge, every mill, every access point to the creek. We can't let this happen again. A shadow in the mist. That night, Mercer returned alone to Hollow Creek Bridge to watch the area. Fog rolled in from the creek, curling across the asphalt like pale fingers. Streetlights reflected dimly off the wet surface, creating phantom shapes in the mist. He checked his flashlight and radio, scanning the perimeter. The forest remained still. Too still. Then he saw movement, barely perceptible, at the edge of the treeline. A figure. Tall, thin, unnaturally still. Mercer's pulse quickened. He raised his flashlight. The beam cut through the fog, illuminating nothing. He lowered it. The figure remained. Watching. Waiting. A whisper drifted across the bridge. He couldn't make out the words, but it sounded like a child's voice. Emily. Mercer's stomach twisted. He stepped forward cautiously. The air grew colder. The mist thickened. Then the figure moved. Swift, almost gliding, disappearing into the fog along the creek bank. Mercer raised the radio, shouting for backup. Static. The whisper returned. Clearer this time. Patterns, they're all around you. Mercer's blood ran cold. He had no idea who or what he was dealing with. But one thing was certain. Hollow Creek's shadows weren't empty. They were alive. And Emily's discovery of the patterns had just put a target on their backs. The stakes rise. By dawn, Mercer, Claire, and Foster had formed a preliminary plan. Every bridge, creek, and abandoned building would be monitored. Residents would be warned. Drones would sweep the forest. But Mercer knew it wasn't enough. Whoever, or whatever, was orchestrating these disappearances was methodical, patient, and ruthless. The patterns weren't just random, they were a code. And Emily, in her frightened brilliance, had uncovered the first threads of it. Mercer leaned back in his chair, staring at the maps spread across the table. Every spiral, circle, and line now carried weight beyond imagination. Claire tapped her pen on the map. We need to decode the patterns before the next disappearance. And we need to do it quietly. Whoever's behind this is watching. Foster nodded grimly. And if the patterns are right, they'll strike in less than 48 hours. Mercer exhaled slowly, his mind racing. Hollow Creek had been a quiet, sleepy town for decades. But now it had a history written in disappearances, symbols, and shadows that moved on their own. And Mercer knew one terrifying truth. Emily's life was just the beginning. The discovery came unexpectedly. Claire Whitman had been poring over Emily's notebook late into the night, mapping spirals and circles over old maps of Hollow Creek, when she noticed something she hadn't seen before. A cluster of symbols aligned in a pattern that didn't correspond to any of the documented disappearances. It was subtle, almost hidden, like a secret message layered on top of an already intricate design. The spirals were tighter here, the lines sharper, radiating toward a small area of the forest that had been overlooked for decades. The old mill isn't the only focus, Claire said, pointing at the map. Mercer leaned over, squinting at the faint pencil marks. What is it? He asked. Look here, she said, circling the symbols. The lines converge on a location that's off any public record. Not on maps, not on property surveys, nothing. Mercer frowned. A house? Possibly. Or some structure that was erased, hidden. But whoever's behind these patterns, they've been using it. That's why the spirals are so precise. The first lead. By sunrise, Mercer and Claire were driving down a narrow, overgrown path on the outskirts of Hollow Creek. Emily had been brought along, sitting quietly in the back seat, her small hands fidgeting with the corner of her notebook. She hadn't spoken much since the last night at the bridge, but when Claire showed her the map, her eyes lit up, and she pointed emphatically at the convergence point. This way, Emily whispered. Mercer glanced at Claire. You trust her instincts? Claire nodded. She's seeing something we can't yet understand. She may be our only guide. The path was nearly impassable. Trees leaned dangerously over the dirt track, their branches forming a canopy that blocked most of the early morning light. The ground was soft from the previous night's rain, leaving deep ruts where a vehicle had passed recently, where someone had dragged something heavy. At the end of the path, they found a clearing, and in the center, partially hidden by overgrown ivy and the remnants of a collapsed fence, stood the house. It was small, weathered, and abandoned, a relic of Hollow Creek's forgotten past. Its roof sagged, shingles missing, and the windows were dark and cracked. But the moment they stepped closer, Mercer felt it. The air was different here, heavier, charged. Something watched from within the shadows of the house. Emily walked toward the front door without hesitation. They're inside, she said softly. Mercer called out, Who's inside? Show yourself. Only silence answered him. Inside the hidden house. Claire led the team inside carefully, flashlights sweeping the interior. Dust lay thick on the floorboards, and the air smelled of mildew and decay. Old furniture leaned against the walls, broken and abandoned, and layers of cobwebs hung like drapes from the ceiling. But the real evidence was on the walls. Symbols. Spirals inside circles, jagged lines, and strange intersecting patterns covered every flat surface. Some were scratched into the wood, others drawn in faded ink, others scrawled with what appeared to be dried mud. Emily knelt beside a particularly large spiral near the staircase, tracing the lines with her finger. It's all connected, she whispered. Mercer frowned. Connected how? Emily looked up, eyes wide. The spirals show movement. Paths. They're instructions for them, or for us. Claire's heart sank. For them? Emily nodded. They plan, they watch, they know where we go. And they've been here before. Mercer crouched, examining the floor. Faint footprints crisscrossed the room, some too small for an adult, others strange, elongated. Not human. It's like a training ground, Mercer muttered. Or a hub. Claire nodded slowly. A hub for the disappearances. Every missing child had some connection to this area. If we can map these spirals, we might find the next location before it's too late. The basement. A creaking floorboard gave them pause, but Mercer led the way down a narrow staircase to the basement. The air grew colder with every step, carrying the unmistakable scent of damp earth and rot. The basement was surprisingly large, far bigger than the house above suggested. Against one wall, shelves held dozens of dusty boxes and notebooks, some bound in leather, some in simple cardboard. Most were filled with pages of symbols, spirals, and strange annotations in handwriting that varied wildly. Some young and careful, some erratic and old. Claire picked one up, flipping through pages that looked decades old. These aren't random, she said. They're ritual logs. Dates, names, patterns. Someone documented every disappearance. Mercer frowned. Every disappearance? How many? Claire shook her head. At least 50. But some pages are missing, torn, burned, or removed entirely. Whoever maintained this, they didn't want anyone to see the whole picture. Emily wandered further into the basement, pausing at a spiral drawn on the floor. She knelt and traced the lines with her fingers. They follow this like a path, she whispered. Mercer knelt beside her. A path to what? Emily didn't answer, her small fingers shaking as she followed the spirals across the floorboards. They go to the center, she finally said. The center, the door. The secret door. Claire's flashlight beam landed on a section of wall that didn't seem aligned with the others. The texture of the wood was subtly different, and a faint draft slipped from its edges. Mercer pressed against it. It gave slightly under his hand. With a shove, the wall swung inward like a door, revealing a narrow corridor leading further underground. Emily gasped softly. The center. They stepped into the corridor. The air was cold, damp, and smelled faintly of earth. The walls were carved with spirals, their lines glowing faintly in the beam of the flashlight, as though the symbols were alive. Mercer felt an unsettling shiver crawl down his spine. The corridor twisted downward in a spiral pattern, matching the drawings in Emily's notebook. Each step echoed like a heartbeat, slow and rhythmic. Claire whispered, "It's like they built the house to hide this, or to protect it." "Protect it?" Mercer asked. "Or themselves," she replied. "Whatever's orchestrating these disappearances, this is their lair." A hidden room. At the end of the corridor, the walls opened into a circular chamber. Candles, long extinguished, were arranged around the perimeter. Dusty remnants of furniture formed a crude circle. But the center was what made Mercer's blood run cold. A pedestal, carved from stone, held a small notebook. Symbols radiated outward across the floor in intricate patterns, matching Emily's drawings exactly. Emily stepped forward. "They planned everything here," she whispered. "Every disappearance, every symbol, it's all part of the same spiral." Claire examined the pedestal. "This isn't just a hideout. It's a control center." Mercer's flashlight caught movement at the edge of the chamber. Shadows flickered along the walls, though no one else was present. "Do you feel that?" Mercer whispered. Emily nodded. "They're here, watching, waiting." The first clue. The notebook on the pedestal was brittle, yellowed with age. Claire carefully opened it. The first page contained a date, 1932. Each subsequent page recorded a child, the location where they were last seen, and a series of spirals and numbers. Some entries had annotations, resisted, taken early, or observation only. Claire's eyes widened. "This isn't just a map, it's a schedule." Mercer frowned. "A schedule for what?" "Abductions," Claire said quietly. "And possibly rituals. Whoever maintained this house, they were organizing disappearances for decades." Emily is the first to notice the pattern before it's too late. Emily stared at the notebook, tracing the spirals with trembling fingers. "The next one," she whispered. "It's coming soon. They'll take someone else." Mercer's stomach tightened. "Then we don't have time. We need to alert the town. Patrol the bridges, the creek, the woods. We need every resource we can get." Claire nodded grimly. "And we need to decode the rest of this notebook. Every spiral, every symbol, every line. We need to predict them before it's too late." The shadows closed in. As they prepared to leave, Mercer felt a cold draft sweep through the chamber. Shadows shifted along the walls, moving independently of any light source. A whisper, barely audible, reached his ears. "You shouldn't be here." Mercer froze. Emily clutched his hand. "Who's there?" he demanded, but the chamber was silent. Only the spirals remained, glowing faintly, a haunting reminder of the hidden house's secrets. He realized then that Hollow Creek was far darker than anyone had imagined, and that the house, hidden for decades, was only the beginning. The orchestrator of the disappearances was still out there, watching, waiting, and preparing the next move. And Mercer knew the spiral's path was far from over. The Hollow Creek Historical Society felt like a mausoleum as Claire Whitman walked through its corridors with Emily in tow. Dust motes hung in the air, illuminated by narrow shafts of sunlight slicing through grimy windows. Every step on the creaking wooden floorboards echoed like a ghostly heartbeat, reminding Claire that this town had been keeping secrets for far too long. Mercer followed behind, notebook in hand, his mind replaying the hidden house and the spirals that seemed to pulse with life. He had tried to explain to Emily the need for patience, for observation, but she was restless, her small fingers twitching as she clutched the notebook from the pedestal. "Emily," Claire said softly, kneeling to her level, "do you remember any of the symbols you drew in the house? Anything that felt different?" Emily's eyes widened. She held up her notebook and pointed to a set of spirals that twisted into tight circles. "These," she whispered, "they're older. Not just from the house, from before." Claire's pulse quickened. Mercer exchanged a glance with her. The girl's words confirmed their fears. The patterns were ancient, stretching back decades, even centuries. They weren't just orchestrating disappearances, they were following a historical rhythm, a spiral that repeated itself through time. Digging through time, Claire and Mercer spread out every historical record they could find. Newspapers, diaries, property deeds, old police files. Every disappearance, every strange report, every minor anomaly, even things locals dismissed as creepy stories, was recorded, plotted, and examined. What emerged was unsettling. Patterns repeated over decades. Children vanished near bridges and mills. Objects disappeared. Strange symbols were reported in the woods and on fences. Witnesses described shadows that moved unnaturally, figures that appeared and vanished. In some reports, children returned days later with strange behaviors, silent, withdrawn, sometimes muttering patterns of spirals or numbers. "Look at this," Claire said, pointing at the timeline she had mapped on a large corkboard. Dates aligned in spirals radiating outward from Hollow Creek, with clusters of disappearances forming tight, repeating loops every 20 to 30 years. Mercer leaned in, frowning. "It's like someone or something is repeating history. Almost like a clock. Every generation has its pattern." Emily tugged on his sleeve. "The spirals, they're like time," she whispered. "They spin, but always come back to the same point. They're waiting for us to follow them." Claire and Mercer exchanged another glance. Emily's observation wasn't childlike imagination, it was insight. She was seeing the rhythm, the cycle the orchestrator had been using for decades. The first connection. They traced the oldest disappearances, going back to the 1920s. One case stood out. A girl named Lillian Hart, 11 years old, vanished near Hollow Creek Bridge. Witnesses reported seeing a shadow emerge from the forest, carrying her into the mist. Her case was closed as unexplained, but a journal entry discovered decades later suggested something far more deliberate. The pattern aligns. The spirals must continue. The next generation will witness the cycle. Claire turned the page. Someone has been documenting this. Someone has been orchestrating it. And the spirals, their instructions, a method to guide events over generations. Mercer rubbed his forehead. "You're saying someone has been planning this for nearly 100 years? Claire nodded grimly. "And if the patterns hold, it's happening again now. The girl we saved, she's part of the next loop." Emily leaned over the table, tracing a spiral with her finger. "They're always watching," she said. "Waiting. And the center is Hollow Creek. The hidden mechanism." Claire remembered the hidden house and the basement chamber filled with spirals and symbols. She realized the house wasn't just a hideout. It was a control center, a nexus of the orchestrator's influence. "The spiral isn't just a pattern of disappearances," she said. "It's a map, a schedule, a clock. And whoever set this in motion, they've built their entire system around it." Mercer frowned. "You mean it's like a machine?" "In a sense," Claire said. "A machine that uses fear, history, and ritual to repeat itself over decades. They've been refining it for generations. And now Emily has triggered the next cycle." Emily's eyes were wide. "Will they come for me?" Mercer took her hand gently. "We'll do everything we can to stop them." Claire, however, was already thinking ahead. "We need to understand the mechanism itself. The pattern isn't just in the past, it's predictive. If we can decode it, we can anticipate the next event, and maybe break the cycle." A breakthrough in the archives. They returned to the archives the following day, tracing property records and historical events. One name kept appearing, Elias Crowley. He was a recluse who lived in Hollow Creek during the 1930s. Newspapers described him as eccentric, obsessed with numerology and esoteric symbols. Witnesses claimed he walked the woods near Hollow Creek at odd hours, often with children in tow who would return days later speaking of strange patterns. More chillingly, a series of letters found in the archives hinted at a network. Crowley corresponded with others in towns across the state, discussing continuity and the spiral's course. Claire's voice trembled as she read one aloud. "The pattern must remain unbroken. Each generation must witness the flow. Observation is key. Intervention is forbidden until the center is ready." Mercer's jaw tightened. Observation forbidden. So they've been orchestrating this all along. And now Emily has seen it. That makes her a target. Emily looked up at them, eyes wide and scared. "The spiral, it's watching me." Claire nodded solemnly. Yes, Emily. And if we don't decode it, it will keep moving. More children, more disappearances, and Hollow Creek will never be safe. The spiral's mechanics. Claire spread out Emily's notebook and the historical logs side by side. Together, they began to map the spirals over time, overlaying them on locations and dates of past disappearances. The result was a terrifying realization. Each spiral had a center, a specific location in Hollow Creek. The distance from the center increased with each loop, expanding outward over decades. Each loop corresponded to a series of disappearances, escalating in frequency and complexity. Symbols indicated movement, behavior patterns, and timing. This isn't random, Claire said. It's deliberate. The orchestrator knows exactly where to strike, when to strike, and who to target, and they've been doing it for generations. Mercer ran his hand through his hair. Then the next strike is imminent. Emily pointed at a spiral that corresponded with the present date. Here, she whispered. This is next. Someone else, they'll take them. Claire nodded. Then we move immediately. We protect the predicted location, monitor the paths, and prepare for whoever, or whatever, is behind this. The first confrontation. Later that evening, Mercer and Claire returned to the hidden house to continue their search. Emily insisted on accompanying them, clutching her notebook tightly. The basement chamber had grown darker since their last visit, as if the spirals themselves had deepened into the shadows. Mercer's flashlight caught movement at the edge of the room. Shadows flickered against the walls, elongating unnaturally. Claire froze. They're here, Emily whispered, pointing at the spirals. They're trying to guide us. Suddenly, a figure stepped from the shadows. Human-shaped, tall, cloaked in black, face obscured. The air grew cold, thick with tension. You shouldn't be here, a voice hissed. It was neither entirely male nor female, human nor animal. It carried layers of sound, like multiple voices speaking at once. Mercer stepped forward. Who are you? What do you want? The figure tilted its head, observing Emily. She sees too much, it said. The cycle must continue. Claire raised a hand. Not if we can stop it. The figure laughed softly, a sound like leaves rustling in a storm. Stop it? You cannot stop the spiral. It has existed before you were born. It will exist after you are gone. Emily stepped forward, holding her notebook high. The spiral doesn't control me, she shouted. I see the pattern. I know what comes next. The figure recoiled slightly, a ripple passing over its shadowy form. Perhaps we underestimated her. A dire warning. The figure vanished as suddenly as it had appeared, leaving the room colder, the shadows longer. Mercer and Claire exchanged grim glances. Emily's voice was small. They're going to come back, and they'll bring others. Claire nodded, swallowing hard. Yes, and we have to be ready. The spiral isn't just history, it's prophecy, and we're running out of time. Mercer's eyes hardened. Then we follow the spiral. Every symbol, every line, every shadow. We'll decode it, and we'll break the cycle before it claims another child. Emily's small hand tightened around her notebook. We have to stop them before the next one disappears. And somewhere in the shadows of Hollow Creek, the orchestrator watched, waiting for the next loop, the next strike, the next victim in the spiral of time. Hollow Creek had always had its landmarks. The bridge, the old mill, the river bend that locals called Widow's Curve. But none loomed as ominously as the tower, a tall, crumbling structure built in the late 1800s as a water observation point. It had long been abandoned, left to rot on a hill overlooking the town. Its silhouette cut a jagged line against the gray sky, a sentinel that had seen decades of secrets. For Claire Whitman and Officer Daniel Mercer, the tower had become the focus of their investigation. The spirals from Emily's notebook pointed unmistakably to it. Every line, every intersection, every circle led to that hill. And if the orchestrator's pattern held, it would be the site of the next disappearance. Preparing for the climb, by mid-morning, the investigative team had gathered at the foot of the hill. The tower, half swallowed by vines and moss, seemed even more foreboding in person. Its windows were black pits, the walls scarred by weather and time. Any idea what we'll find inside? Mercer asked, adjusting his flashlight. Claire shook her head. It's a prediction point. The spirals suggest someone will be there, watching or preparing. This could be where the orchestrator keeps their instruments. Emily clutched her notebook. I can feel it. The spirals are tighter here. The center is here. Mercer's jaw tightened. Then we go carefully. We don't know if it's just a trap or worse. Ascending the tower. The climb was treacherous. Loose stones threatened to give way underfoot, and the iron staircase, rusted and squealing, groaned with every step. Mercer led the way, Claire following closely, flashlight beams dancing across peeling paint and spiderwebs. Emily's small steps were surprisingly sure, as if she had walked the path before in the spiral's pattern. Halfway up, Mercer froze. A faint scratching echoed above them. It was slow, deliberate, almost rhythmic. "Did you hear that?" he whispered. Claire nodded. "Someone or something is already here." Emily stopped at the top of the spiral staircase, pointing toward a broken window. Outside, the mist swirled like a living thing. Through the fog, they could see shadows moving at the edge of the woods, circling, watching. "They know we're here," Claire said, swallowing hard. Mercer nodded. "Then we make this count. We can't let them escape again." The observation room. At the top of the tower, they found an observation room. Broken windows allowed the wind to whistle through jagged openings. Dust covered every surface, but Mercer immediately noticed the floor was different. Clean, as if someone had been here recently. Emily ran to the center of the room, kneeling beside a chalk circle drawn on the floor. Symbols similar to those in her notebook radiated outward. "They're tracking the pattern," she whispered. "The next target, they're planning it here." Claire examined the chalk lines. "It's more than planning. These markings match dates, names, every past disappearance." She traced a line connecting the chalk spirals to the top of the staircase. "This is their command center." Mercer's voice dropped to a whisper. "And whoever is orchestrating this is probably still inside the building or watching from the forest." A sudden attack. Suddenly, the wind shifted, and the shadows outside condensed. From the broken window, a figure lunged, a blur of black, moving faster than humanly possible. Mercer reacted instinctively, tackling the figure to the ground. Claire drew her weapon, but the figure struggled with unnatural strength, slamming Mercer against the wall. Emily screamed, clutching her notebook to her chest. The figure's face remained hidden under a hood, but its voice was a harsh whisper. "You cannot stop the spiral. The cycle continues." Claire aimed her flashlight directly at the intruder, revealing glimpses of a strange mask, something carved in the same spiral patterns that Emily had been following. Mercer tackled the figure again, managing to push it toward the window. Then, just as suddenly as it had attacked, the figure vanished into the mist outside, leaving only the echo of its laughter. Emily sank to the floor, trembling. "They're too strong, too fast, the spirals, they're alive." Mercer knelt beside her. "It's okay. We're still here. We survived. And we'll stop them." Decoding the next step. Claire knelt beside Emily's notebook. "We can't chase shadows," she said. "We need to decode the next target from the spirals themselves. The tower is a hub. They use it to calculate the next strike." Emily flipped pages rapidly. "The lines they point, the creek, near the old train tracks, that's next." Mercer's stomach tightened. "The tracks near Hollow Creek Station? Children play there, families walk along the platform every evening. We have to move fast." Claire nodded. "We'll set surveillance, block exits, and wait. Whoever's planning this, they expect us to make mistakes. We won't." Emily pointed to a small spiral near the center of the notebook. "If we don't stop them here, the spiral will grow tighter. More disappearances, more cycles." Mercer exhaled slowly. "Then we prepare. Every route, every bridge, every path along the tracks. No one goes in or out without us knowing." The town on edge. As night fell, Hollow Creek grew tense. Patrols were set along the creek, bridges, and the abandoned tracks. Residents were warned to stay indoors. Drones hovered over the forest, and Claire coordinated a team of state police, K-9 units, and local volunteers. But Mercer couldn't shake the feeling that the spiral wasn't just in the symbols or the patterns. It was in the town itself. Hollow Creek seemed alive, as if the very streets, trees, and shadows were part of the orchestrators' plan. Emily sat quietly in the command tent, tracing spirals with her finger on the table. Her face was pale, but her eyes were sharp. "They're coming tonight," she said. "The spiral, it moves fast." Claire leaned over her shoulder. We'll be ready. We have to. Mercer watched the forest edge through the tent's open flap. The mist swirled unnaturally, and shapes seemed to form within it, tall, thin figures moving in patterns that mirrored the spirals. They're out there, Mercer muttered. And they're not human, or at least not entirely. The night before the strike. As midnight approached, the tension in Hollow Creek reached a breaking point. Mercer and Claire positioned themselves along the predicted paths, flanking the tracks where Emily had indicated the next target would be. Emily was carried along in a protective arm, her notebook clutched tightly. She whispered warnings, guiding them along the spiral's invisible lines. Each symbol, each intersection, each circle corresponded to a physical path, a hidden network of observation points the orchestrator used to track their movements. The forest seemed to lean in, listening. Shadows twisted unnaturally, and the sound of distant whispers carried faintly on the wind. Mercer kept his hand on his weapon, eyes scanning the darkness for any sign of movement. Claire whispered into the radio, coordinating teams. Stay alert. Any movement, any disturbance, report immediately. The next victim is due any moment. Suddenly, the first figure emerged from the mist, tall, cloaked, and moving with unnatural speed. Mercer aimed, but the figure vanished before he could act. Emily shouted, pointing. Over there! Follow the spiral! Claire and Mercer sprinted toward the path she indicated, flashlight beams cutting through the fog. Shadows twisted around them, shapes moving faster than human reflexes should allow. And then they saw it, a small figure, a child, being guided toward the tracks. The child hadn't noticed the danger yet, too small to understand the threat. Mercer's heart pounded. This was the moment they had been preparing for, the confrontation that would test every instinct, every clue, every line of the spiral they had been deciphering. The tower's true purpose. As they approached the child, Mercer realized something terrifying. The tower had not just been a lookout. It had been the orchestrator's calculation hub, a vantage point to manipulate the spiral, plan the cycles, and select targets with chilling precision. The tower, it's a control point, Claire muttered. They've been using it to choreograph disappearances for decades, and now we're in their rhythm. Emily's hand gripped Mercer's arm. We have to break it tonight. Mercer's eyes narrowed. We will, but we do it carefully. One wrong move, and the spiral grows. One wrong move, and we lose more children. As the first figure drew closer to the tracks, the fog thickened, the spiral's rhythm pulsing around them like a living thing. Mercer, Claire, and Emily knew one truth. The orchestrator would not yield easily, and Hollow Creek's darkest secret was about to reveal itself. The night was far from over. The spiral was tightening, the tower's judgment imminent, and the first strike of this new cycle was only the beginning. The first light of dawn barely touched Hollow Creek, yet the town already felt different. Shadows clung longer to the streets, and the mist along the creek was thicker than ever, curling through the alleys and around abandoned homes like a living thing. Officer Daniel Mercer and Detective Claire Whitman arrived early, following Emily's instructions. Her notebook, filled with spirals, lines, and cryptic annotations, had led them to the outskirts of the town, the area where the next predicted target was most likely to be taken. You really think the spiral points to a single target? Mercer asked, scanning the forested edge of the hill. Claire adjusted her glasses, eyes fixed on the foggy tree-line. Not just a single target, she said, her voice tight. The spiral shows movement. It shows paths. It shows how the orchestrator manipulates people, and maybe even the town itself. Emily's small hand clutched Mercer's sleeve. They've been hiding here in the town. The spiral, it's built into everything. Houses, streets, bridges, even the school playground. They've watched us for years. Mercer swallowed hard. Then we're not just looking for one person. We're looking at a network. The target. The spiral led them to an abandoned row of houses along the edge of town, dilapidated structures once owned by Hollow Creek's oldest families. Emily's finger traced one on the notebook. Here, she said. They're inside. Claire motioned for Mercer to stay back as she approached the front of the house. Windows were broken, doors splintered. The floorboards creaked under her weight. Inside, shadows moved. Not just the natural play of light, but shapes that flickered at the edges of vision. Thin, tall, moving unnaturally. Mercer joined her, gun raised, flashlight slicing through the gloom. In the corner, a young boy crouched, pale and shaking. His eyes darted wildly as he whispered, "They said I couldn't leave." I had to follow the lines, the spirals. Emily knelt beside him, holding out her notebook. "I can help. I understand the spirals. You can come with us." The boy hesitated, then took her hand. Claire motioned for Mercer to cover the exit. "We've got him. Now we find the orchestrator's trap." Unraveling the network. Back at the command tent, Claire and Mercer mapped the new information onto the spirals in Emily's notebook. Each location, each disappearance, each victim revealed a pattern. "They're not random," Claire said. "The orchestrator has agents, or helpers, people who watch, guide, and manipulate. The spiral is a network, and every thread leads to a hub. The tower was one. This house is another." Mercer frowned. "Then the town itself, it's part of the trap." Emily nodded. "They've used Hollow Creek for generations. They know every path, every shortcut, every hiding place. We've been walking in their design all along." Claire traced lines from the house to other abandoned buildings, bridges, and creek paths. Every building is a node. Every node is a stage in the spiral. And every stage has a cycle. Mercer exhaled slowly. "Then breaking the network means breaking the cycle. But we don't even know who's at the top of this spiral." Emily whispered, "I think I know the shadows. They're following someone, a leader." The first trap. Claire and Mercer followed the clues to an old community center, abandoned after a fire decades ago. According to Emily's notebook, the orchestrator used this location as a secondary hub, monitoring activity across the town. As they approached, the fog thickened. Shadows moved in unnatural patterns, twisting and stretching along the walls of the ruined building. Mercer's flashlight caught glints of metal, tripwires, hooks, and rudimentary surveillance equipment. Claire crouched low. "It's a trap. They've been expecting us." Suddenly, a wire snapped under Mercer's boot, triggering a hidden mechanism. The floor beneath them shifted, revealing a pit lined with broken glass and rusty nails. They leapt back just in time, narrowly avoiding injury. Emily gasped. They wanted us to fall. They're testing us." Mercer's jaw clenched. "Then it's real. The spiral isn't just historical, it's active. And we just stepped into the first real trap. The hidden rooms. Inside the building, they discovered hidden rooms behind false walls. Each contained notebooks, symbols, and records, evidence of decades of planning. Names of children, dates of disappearances, and intricate spirals connecting locations covered the walls. Claire scanned the pages. This is more than a record. It's instructions. Someone has been orchestrating disappearances for generations, teaching others how to maintain the spiral. Mercer nodded grimly. And now they're using Emily's insight to adapt. They've realized she sees the pattern. That makes her dangerous to them. Emily pointed to a spiral drawn in the corner of one page. "Here, the next victim. They'll take someone tonight, unless we stop them." Claire set her jaw. "Then we stop them. Every route, every exit. We block the spiral's path before it reaches the next node." The surveillance operation. That night, Hollow Creek was alive with quiet tension. Claire coordinated a network of volunteers, officers, and K-9 units. Drones hovered over forests and streets, flashlights swept across abandoned structures, and patrols were stationed along every predicted route. Emily guided them using her notebook, pointing to intersections and nodes in the spiral. Each point revealed hidden vantage points, observation routes, and likely traps. Mercer kept his gun ready, scanning the darkness. "It's too quiet," he muttered. "They're waiting for us to make a mistake." Emily whispered, "They're learning. They adapt. But they make patterns, always patterns. If we follow the spiral, we can predict them." Claire nodded. "Then we follow every line, every shadow, every signal. We anticipate and we act." Confronting the orchestrator's agents. Around midnight, movement was detected near a cluster of abandoned houses. Figures emerged, cloaked, moving in the unnatural patterns Emily had predicted. Mercer and Claire split, moving along the predicted paths. They intercepted two agents trying to corner a child near the creek. Mercer tackled one, struggling as the figure resisted with strength far beyond normal. Claire reached the child, dragging them to safety while Emily's notebook guided every step. The agents attempted to vanish into the mist, but the team's preparation and Emily's insights allowed them to contain the threat. Handcuffs and ropes secured the first captured agents, and Claire immediately began interrogation. They were following orders, one agent admitted, voice shaking. The spiral, it's bigger than Hollow Creek. We would just maintain it. Mercer frowned. Maintain it? How many people are involved? The agent's eyes darted nervously. Too many, and the leader, you can't stop the spiral. The tower, the notebooks, the nodes, it all continues. Emily clenched her notebook. We have to stop it. Tonight. Uncovering the town's secrets. The agents revealed more than they expected. Hollow Creek itself had been a central hub for decades. Residents, either complicit, coerced, or entirely unaware, had been used to maintain the spiral. Children had been watched, recorded, and guided along invisible paths, all feeding into the orchestrator's cycle. Claire realized the horrifying truth. The spiral wasn't just a series of disappearances. It was a town-wide operation, meticulously maintained for generations. And Emily's insight had disrupted the pattern, forcing the orchestrator to act sooner than expected. Mercer shook his head. So the town itself, it's part of the trap. Claire nodded grimly. Yes, and now we know why the spiral is so precise. Every street, every alley, every building was used as a node. And if we don't dismantle it, the cycle will continue forever. Emily whispered, we can stop it. We have to. Mercer tightened his grip on his weapon. Then we find the leader. We follow the nodes. And we break the spiral at its source. The first major victory. By dawn, the first agents had been captured and one child rescued. Emily's insight had allowed the team to predict movements, anticipate traps, and intervene before the orchestrator could strike again. But the victory was bittersweet. The town's secrets ran deeper than anyone had imagined. Hollow Creek had been a silent participant in decades of orchestrated terror, and the orchestrator, the person or entity controlling the spiral, remained at large, watching from the shadows, planning the next move. Claire looked at Mercer, her eyes hard. This is bigger than we thought, but we've made progress. The spiral is starting to unravel, and the next strike will be ready. Mercer nodded. But we can't get complacent. They've been doing this for decades, and they won't stop until the spiral completes, or until we stop them. Emily stood beside them, clutching her notebook tightly. We'll stop it. Together. And somewhere in Hollow Creek, hidden in plain sight, the orchestrator was already preparing the next trap. The spiral's deadly design continued to move forward, and Mercer, Claire, and Emily were racing against time to break the cycle before another child vanished. The spiral was more than a pattern. It was alive. Claire Whitman had long suspected that the orchestrator, whom they now referred to as the architect, was not just an abstract presence guiding events from the shadows. The clues left in Emily's notebook, the nodes they had traced across Hollow Creek, and the hidden houses all pointed toward someone with intimate knowledge of the town, someone who had planned generations of disappearances with meticulous precision. Now the question remained, who was the architect? And why had they waited so long for Emily to trigger the next cycle? A hidden lead. Claire, Mercer, and Emily reconvened in the command tent. Maps and notebooks spread across the table like a constellation of clues. The captured agents from the previous night had provided some answers, but each revelation only deepened the mystery. They know every street, every building, Mercer said. This isn't just about Hollow Creek. They've been building the spiral for decades. Someone had to teach them. Emily's small fingers traced the spiral diagrams, stopping at certain nodes. These lines, they're different. Older. Deeper. They were drawn by someone else, someone who started the spiral. Claire leaned in. You mean the architect left clues for themselves? Or for the next generation? Emily nodded slowly. Yes. And I think the architect might be closer than we realize. Someone we know. Mercer frowned. Closer? You mean in town? Here. Emily's eyes were wide, almost fearful. Yes, someone who's been watching the spirals for years, someone who blends in, who pretends to be ordinary. Connecting the dots. Claire began to sift through decades of town records, property deeds, and old photographs. One name kept appearing. Evelyn Marsh, a local historian and librarian. Evelyn had lived in Hollow Creek all her life, meticulously documenting its history, collecting diaries, letters, and journals that mentioned disappearances. Her work had always seemed obsessive but harmless, until now. Mercer ran a background check. Evelyn had no criminal record, no history of violence. But every historical anomaly in Hollow Creek seemed to lead back to her. She had access to archives, knew the town's layout intimately, and her family had lived in Hollow Creek for generations. Claire's pulse quickened. She's the only one who could have orchestrated this from the shadows, while remaining invisible. Her knowledge of the town, her obsession with patterns, it all fits. Emily's eyes filled with fear. The spirals, she drew some of them herself, long ago. And she's been following the others, guiding them, teaching them the pattern, the nodes, everything. Mercer's jaw tightened. Then she's the architect. That explains the precision. That explains how they've been planning for generations. The confrontation plan. Claire knew they needed to confront Evelyn, but they had to be careful. The architect was intelligent, cunning, and had already set traps for anyone who got too close. We can't just walk in, Claire said. She knows we're onto her. If she's the architect, she'll have contingencies, followers, maybe even more traps. Mercer nodded. We set up a perimeter. No one leaves. Every exit, every alley, every path she could use, we cover it. Then we lure her out. Emily clutched her notebook. The spirals, they can guide us. I can read them, predict her moves. Claire took her hand. Then we do it together. We follow the spiral to its center. Tracking Evelyn. The team moved cautiously, using Emily's notebook to predict Evelyn's movements. The spirals indicated that she would attempt to manipulate events from her home, a large, weathered house on the outskirts of town, surrounded by trees that hid it from casual view. As they approached, Mercer noticed subtle signs of preparation. Broken branches along the path, footprints leading away from windows, and faint chalk symbols etched into the stone fence. She's expecting us, Mercer muttered, and she's prepared for a fight. Emily's face was pale but determined. The spiral is guiding her, but it also guides us. Follow the nodes, stay on the lines. Claire nodded, taking a deep breath. Then let's end this. Tonight, we find the architect. Inside the house. They entered the house cautiously, flashlights cutting through the darkness. The interior was meticulously organized. Bookshelves lined the walls, filled with historical texts, journals, and old notebooks. Spirals, symbols, and annotations were etched into the floors, walls, and ceiling. A maze of patterns designed to control movement and perception. In the center of the main room stood Evelyn Marsh. She was older than they expected, with sharp eyes and a calm demeanor that belied